Please take me. I'll work for free. What the cowboy said next changed her forever. Before we ride into this story, take a moment to drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from, what town or city you're calling home tonight. And when the end this story, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Now lean back, get comfortable, and enjoy the story. Please take me. I'll work for free. She said, Cowboy Saeed, you're the woman I've been waiting for. She stood at the edge of the yard, boots sunk in mud, hands raw, eyes wide as the sky behind her, and said, with a voice that barely held, Please take me. I'll work for free. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just looked at her like he'd been waiting for years. And finally, someone had shown up. Montana Territory, spring of 1882. The wind still howled like winter hadn't let go. And in that wind walked a woman who had run out of places to go. Her name was Veronica Hale, 32, Missouri born, but most folks only saw what was left of her. A dust-stained dress, a leather satchel worn thin at the seams, hands chapped and cracked from too much work and too little rest. She had once been a miner's wife, then a widow, then a mother who watched her boys be taken from her because the world don't pause for grief. Now, she was nothing but a shadow with boots and breath, stepping off a westbound freight wagon with no money, no plan, only a name, and the will to keep moving. The cattle town of Doveytail wasn't a place for dreams. It was a place for survival. She passed the saloon doors, the judgmental stares, the whispers, but she didn't stop walking, not until she saw the ranch past the ridge. A stretch of fencing and land brushed in thawing frost. Farnham Ranch, they called it, belonged to a man named Vaughn Fletcher. She found him near the corral, breaking a young Mustang with a kind of patience most men had forgotten. One hand on the reins, the other steady near the trembling horse's jaw. Broad-shouldered, calm-eyed, a man shaped by land, not luck. And without hesitation, she crossed the muddy yard and said the only thing she had left, Please take me. I'll work for free. He didn't answer right away, just looked at her, really. Looked like a man trying to see past the bones of a person and into the truth that lived beneath them. You got a name, miss? He asked, voice deep but not unkind. Veronica Hale, she said. I can cook, sew, clean, anything. Just don't send me away. He stepped forward, eyes holding hers steady. You're the woman I've been waiting for, he said. She blinked, thought she'd misheard, but he didn't flinch. I won't take your work for free, he added. But if you're offering honesty and heart, I've got room for both. By sundown that day, she had already scrubbed the scullery clean, mended 2 shirts from a forgotten basket, and stirred a pot of beans like she'd done 100 nights back in Missouri, back when she still had a table to serve them at. He watched her from the doorway, quiet, just enough warmth in his eyes to make her hands shake. You always work this fast? He asked. If I stop, she said, not looking up. I think too much. That night, she sat on the edge of the bunkhouse bed, blanket tucked to her knees, staring out the small window at nothing but wind and stars. He had given her supper, a roof, a moment of dignity, but peace. Peace still felt like a trick, because 2 years of running leaves more than scars. It leaves silence where a woman used to sing. She whispered into the dark. Would he still let me stay if he knew everything? Part 1. What's left of a name? The wind had teeth that spring not sharp enough to bleed, but just mean enough to remind you that winter wasn't done making its point. Veronica rose before dawn on her first full day at Farnham Ranch. The bunkhouse was cold, not cruel. She ran her fingers over the wool blanket folded at the foot of the bed, Real wool, not patched burlap. She hadn't slept through a night in months, but this morning, she woke to silence instead of sirens in her chest. Outside, the sky hadn't yet cracked open, just a low, gray stretch, thin as an old quilt, laid flat over the land. She pulled on her dress, the only one she owned, and stepped into her boots barefoot. The laces were frayed. One eyelet had split, but they held like she did. Vaughn was already outside, saddle slung over his shoulder, fog catching on the stubble of his jaw. He handed her a tin cup of coffee without a word. It burned her tongue, but she didn't flinch. She just nodded, wrapped her hands around the heat, and followed him toward the north fence. He worked with the quiet of a man who knew every inch of what he owned. She watched the way he tied knots fast, sure, not showy. She mirrored him best she could, held posts steady when he hammered, didn't make a sound. When a splinter drove deep into her palm, she bit it out with her teeth. When blood smeared the sleeve of her dress, he caught her wrist gentle, wordless. He pulled a folded strip of cloth from his pocket clean and wrapped her hand, tight but careful. "You don't have to break yourself to prove anything," he said, eyes still on the rope. "I do, though," she whispered. "It's all I have left." He didn't argue, just nodded once, tied the final twist. They spent the day like that, no real talk, just labor and breath. By sunset, her arms ached, her fingers shook, but her heart had quieted. That night, she scrubbed the kitchen floors on her knees. The stone bruised her, but she didn't stop until it shone. She didn't trust stillness. Stillness gave memory too much room. She sat on the edge of the bunk, hands in her lap. The moonlight caught the satchel beneath the bed, the one she'd carried all the way from Missouri. She hadn't opened it since. Inside were three things: a button from Micah's coat, a crumpled drawing of a three-legged horse, Matthew's, and a letter from the orphanage that said they were being held until fit care could be provided. She hadn't been fit, apparently not in mourning, not in poverty, not in grief. She slid the satchel back under the bed and lay down without undressing. The next morning, Vaughn asked if she could ride. She said no. He didn't ask why. He just handed her a rope and taught her how to lead the gentler mare down to water. She worked that week like a woman repaying a debt no one had asked for. She patched curtains with thread so thin it snapped twice, stirred stew with a cracked spoon, boiled water 3 times for the same wash bucket. Every motion exact, deliberate. Vaughn watched her, sometimes not judging, just recognizing, like he knew the look of someone trying not to fall apart where others could see. He never asked what she was running from. He just kept the water warm, made sure the food was enough. And when the dust caught in her throat, he handed her the clean cup, not the dented one. On the 6th day, she found him in the barn, oiling harness straps. He didn't speak, so she didn't either. She sat across from him, took a bit of tack, and began polishing. After a while, her hands slowed. "I had 2 sons," she said, voice just above the creak of straw. "Micah's 12 now, Matthew's 7. I think I lost track." Vaughn didn't speak, just set the leather aside slow, like it might break. "My husband died in a cave-in outside St. Louis. His debts took the house. I couldn't feed them. The church took them, said they'd find a place. I tried to get them back." She laughed once, dry and bitter. "But no one hires a widow with nothing. I just kept walking west, thinking maybe, if I didn't stop, something might turn up." Vaughn walked to the wall, pulled down a lantern, lit it slow. "You ever been to Butte?" he asked. She shook her head. "There's a reverend there, runs a boys' home. I could ask." Her breath caught. "You'd do that." He turned, and for the first time, something broke through that quiet calm. Not romance, not pity, just human decency, laid bare. No one should carry that kind of ache alone. That night, she dropped a chipped mug near the hearth. It shattered. She didn't clean it right away. She just stared at the shards, breath shaking, and then she cried. Not loud, just enough to feel it. At dawn, Vaughn had the horses saddled. If you want to find them, he said, I'll ride with you. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They left that morning, dust rising behind them like smoke. He rode steady, always glancing her way when he thought she wouldn't notice. That night, they camped beside the river, and when she leaned into him by the fire, eyes closed, he let her, and for the first time in 2 years, she slept through the night. The satchel tucked beneath the bunk, the broken mug still lying cold at the hearth. Vaughn, leading the horses out front. Veronica behind him, hand bandaged, face turned toward the rising sun. She wasn't healed, but she had finally stopped bleeding. Part 2. The mug wasn't the only thing that broke. The road to Butte stretched long and wind-scoured. They rode mostly in silence. Veronica's hands gripped the reins too tight, knuckles white with memory. Vaughn stayed close, not crowding, not leading just there. A steady shape in her side vision, like a watchtower that never turned away. Since the night she cried by the hearth, words had become slippery, dangerous, too close to hope. On the second day, they reached a ridge where the valley split open like a folded map. Far off, Butte shimmered beneath a haze of smoke and metal clangs, a town built on Earth's raw wounds. Mines, rail lines, men with hard faces and harder hands. You sure about this? Vaughn asked, shading his eyes from the sun. She swallowed. No. He nodded. That's fair. And they rode on. The boys' home sat at the edge of town. Brick walls, crooked bell tower, a porch lined with boots too small for the men who left them there. The Reverend opened the door with soot on his collar and sleeves rolled to the elbow. We're not exactly a church, he said, but we don't turn them away. He listened as Veronica gave their names. Micah and Matthew Hale, she said. I'm their mother. He studied her, not with doubt, but like a man, measuring how deep the storm ran in someone's bones. Wait here. When the door opened again, she forgot how to breathe. Micah stepped out first, taller now, thinner, eyes older than 12 should allow. Then Matthew smaller, slower, clinging to the hem of his brother's coat. Veronica dropped to her knees in the dust. I came back, she whispered. I promised I would. They didn't run to her. Micah's brow stayed furrowed. Matthew stared, like she was a ghost from an old story. She reached for them, slowly, careful, like they might bolt if she moved too fast. It's really me, she choked. Mama's here. Matthew's lip trembled. Then he broke, launching into her arms, sobs catching like barbed wire on a fence. Micah followed slower, but when he folded into her shoulder, her body gave. The years of ache cracked open, and something living finally came through. She didn't remember the walk back to the horses, only Vaughn's voice. We'll take them home. The Reverend didn't ask for papers, just watched with tired eyes. You sure? He asked Vaughn. I've got land, Vaughn said. They've got their mother. That's enough. That night, they camped by the same river bend, but it wasn't quiet now. Matthew fell asleep with Veronica's braid wrapped in his fist. Micah stared at the stars, asking about barns and horses and whether the roof leaked. Veronica held them close, whispering, You're safe now. You're safe. But in her chest, something new bloomed, a fear she hadn't had the strength to feel before. What if it didn't last? They returned to Farnham Ranch on the 4th day. Dust rose behind the wagon, like smoke trailing a fire that hadn't gone out. Vaughn stepped off, first lifted Matthew down, then held out a hand for Micah. The boy hesitated, then took it. Veronica watched from the wagon bench, hand pressed tight over her heart. The boys were back, but home still felt like a question. The first week was quiet. Micah slept in the loft with his boots on. Matthew clung to Veronica's skirts, afraid to cross the yard alone. No one asked why things had gone wrong. They just watched, listened, learning the shape of a new kind of silence. Vaughn never asked what the boys had lived through. He just showed Micah how to clean a saddle, handed Matthew a stick and said, "Try whittling. Start with a square." At night, Veronica sat by the fire, hands around a mug of tea, eyes flicking toward the door every time the wind shifted. She kept expecting someone to walk in and say it had all been a mistake. One evening, she stepped out into the yard. Vaughn sat on the edge of the well, fiddling with his spur. "They don't know how to play anymore," she said. He didn't look up. "They will. Takes time." She folded her arms tight. "I keep thinking, I'll wake up and they'll be gone again. It happened that fast last time. One day, I was their mother. The next, I was no one." He stood slowly. "You're not no one," he said. "Not to them, not to me." She didn't step back, but she didn't step forward either. The wind stirred between them. The stars blinked down without answers. Later, Micah sat beside Vaughn on the porch steps. After a long quiet, the boy spoke. "Mama used to sing, 'Before.'" Vaughn nodded. Micah handed him a bent nail. "Think I could build something. Think you already are," Vaughn said. The next day, Veronica caught them hammering planks on the barn wall. Micah stood on a stool, driving a nail into two crooked boards. "What's this?" she asked. "A co-op," Micah said. "For what?" "Chickens," Vaughn answered. "He thinks we should keep some." Micah's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. She stepped back, throat thick. The last time she'd seen Micah build anything, it was a toy boat out of twine and scraps. Days before they lost the house. "Will it keep them warm through winter?" she asked. Micah paused. "Not yet, but it will." That night, she found Matthew asleep in Vaughn's old rocker, a half-whittled stick in his lap. She lifted him gently, carried him to the loft. Downstairs, Vaughn stood by the window, arms crossed. "You could have sent us on our way," she said. "Most men would have." He didn't turn. "I didn't want to." That's not the same as saying why. He looked at her, then not with longing, with recognition, like a man who'd been lonely for years, but never needed company. Just someone who made silence feel full. "Because you walked onto my land with truth in your voice. Because you didn't ask for pity, just a chance. Because this house was too quiet for too long." He turned back to the dark. "Now there's bread in the oven, boys in the yard, and you." He paused. "You make it feel like home." She didn't reach for him, but she stood close enough to feel the warmth of his breath. Behind them, the fire crackled low, and in the quiet space between what had been lost and what might still be built, Veronica felt the ache begin to change shape. Part 3. Stay. If you want to. The frost had begun to lift by the time the prairie lupine bloomed. Pale purple and white blossoms scattered across the hills, like someone had spilled color just to prove that something fragile could survive out here. Veronica knelt in the garden behind the bunkhouse, sleeves rolled high, hands deep in soil. Matthew crouched beside her, dropping carrot seeds one by one, slow as a prayer. "Not too deep," she murmured. "Even roots need light eventually." He nodded, brow furrowed with concentration. She brushed the hair from his eyes, her fingers lingering longer than needed. From the barn roof came the sound of hammering. Micah and Vaughn were laying shingles. Vaughn moved like a man who didn't waste effort. Micah moved like a boy, memorizing everything. Veronica watched, head tilted. Micah's shoulders sat straighter these days. He didn't smile much, but he listened, and that counted. At supper, Vaughn handed her a folded cloth bundle. Inside were 2 new spools of thread, brown and slate blue, and a pair of sewing scissors, smooth handles, sharp blades, not rusted, like the ones she'd been using since Missouri. Traded the McCready boys for those, he said. Figured you deserved better than patching quilts with fishing line. She ran her thumb along the steel. You didn't have to. I know, he said. I wanted to. That night, after the dishes dried and the boys had gone to bed, Veronica stepped outside. The stars stretched wide across the ridge. Pinned in black velvet, she found Vaughn by the cottonwood near the well. Hands loose at his sides, eyes fixed on the sky, she walked to him slowly. Every step, an act of courage she didn't name. When she reached him, her hand brushed his. I want to stay, she said. He turned, still and quiet, but his eyes had dropped their guard. I hoped you would, he said. I'm still learning how. So am I. They stood like that for a long time, her head resting on his shoulder, his thumb tracing the back of her hand. No declarations, no promises, just two people choosing something unfinished. And finally, not running from it. 2 mornings later, she knocked on the farmhouse door at sunrise. Vaughn opened it, shirt half buttoned, sawdust in his hair. I've been thinking, she said. About what? About staying in the house with you. He didn't answer right away, just stepped aside. You sure? I am. Then you're welcome. She brought her belongings in a single wooden chest. Her sewing kit tucked between linens, folded so many times they'd begun to fray. He cleared a drawer without being asked. That night, she cooked supper in his kitchen. Micah didn't say much, but he asked for seconds. Matthew curled up in Vaughn's old rocker again. On Sunday, Reverend Beach rode up the trail coat, dusty, horse-lathered. Vaughn met him at the gate. Came to check on the boys, the Reverend muttered. Heard some things. Veronica stepped onto the porch, wiping flour from her palms. You heard I took them back, she asked. Heard you gave up everything to do it. I had neighbors back east, she said. Still lost everything. And what have you found here? She looked toward the barn, then the creek, where the boys were skipping stones, enough to stop running. The Reverend nodded, tipped his hat. Then I reckon you don't need my advice. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Vaughn opened a cedar case beneath his bed and took out an old fiddle. He tuned it slow, ran a cloth over the strings. You play, Micah asked from the hearth. A little, Vaughn said. My mother used to hum along. The first note was thin. The second, steadier. He played a tune none of them knew deep, winding, full of space between the notes. Veronica sat on the floor, hands folded in her lap, eyes closed. When he finished, Matthew clapped once, then buried his face against her knee. Play it again, Micah said. Vaughn did, and the second time, it sounded like it belonged to them. Later, in the hush of their room, Veronica set the brush down and looked at Vaughn's back. You ever think about what's next? She asked. He turned slowly. Every morning, for us, this place, the boys, he crossed to the curtain, closed it gently. I think we build something, not fast, not loud, just real. She stepped closer, hands resting at his collar. And if I want to marry you, he stilled. You do. I do, she whispered. But not for safety, not for land, for you. His hands rose to her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. You've been mine since that first morning, he said. I just didn't speak it. Then speak it now. I love you, he said, and I want you beside me, always. She leaned into him. Then I'm already yours. The wedding was small, just the boys, Mrs. Lyle from the neighboring ranch, and Reverend Beach. Veronica wore a calico dress, buttons up the back. Micah had fastened each one with careful fingers. Vaughn wore his clean coat, boots polished to a quiet shine. You look like spring, he whispered when she reached him, like something that came through the cold and lived. The vows were simple. The bread was sweet. The wind carried their words across the grass. That night, after the fire dimmed and the porch emptied. Veronica stood barefoot by the door, watching the boys chase fireflies near the creek bend. Vaughn stepped beside her, slid his hand into hers. "You think it's foolish?" she asked. "To hope it'll always be like this?" "No," he said. "But even if it changes, we'll face it together." She nodded, and for the first time, she believed him. Part 4. The sound of a life being made. The last frost passed without ceremony. One morning, the fence rails were rimmed in ice. The next, the ground gave beneath your boots, like it had finally remembered how to breathe. Veronica didn't notice the change in the trees. She noticed it in herself. She no longer woke with her fists clenched. The ache behind her eyes still stirred sometimes, but it no longer ruled her. She stood at the porch rail, mending one of Matthew's shirts. The linen was soft from too many washes. The thread ran smooth beneath her fingers even. Certain, near the barn, Vaughn hitched the wagon. He glanced up and tipped his hat, not from habit, but because he still looked at her like he couldn't quite believe she'd stayed. "Thinking we ride into town?" he said, brushing hay from his sleeves. "Micah's due for boots. I've got business with the registrar." She paused, mid-stitch. "Registrar for a marriage license," he said, plain as dust. "You said yes. I'd like to make it official." She smiled, not wide, but full. "And the boots. Boy's toes are bleeding through the seams." They rode out mid-morning, the wagon creaking gently. Micah rode beside the rear wheel, back straight in the saddle. Vaughn had helped him oil the night before. Matthew sat between them, chattering about birds and river stones. Veronica leaned against Vaughn's shoulder, her hand resting light on his knee, the way a woman does when the man beside her is no longer a stranger, but a place she returns to. Town was louder than she remembered. Sawmill clatter, shop bells, too many stories pressed into two small corners. But the boys didn't flinch. They moved through the dry goods store like they belonged there. Micah tried on boots that rose clean to his calf. He walked the plank floor with quiet pride, then nodded once. "They'll do." Vaughn paid without blinking. "See the registrar," he told Veronica. "You visit the seamstress, pick whatever you like." She raised an eyebrow. "Don't let him talk you into anything fancy." "I won't," he said, "just honest." She chose a bolt of soft blue calico. When the seamstress asked, "Buttons up the back or front?" Veronica didn't hesitate. "Back. I'll have help." Micah stood at the door, arms folded, watching everything, just like his father used to, just like Vaughn now did. That Friday came with a sky so clear it hurt. The cottonwoods shimmered in new green. The boys wore their brushed jackets. Veronica braided her hair and tied it with a ribbon. The blue dress fit like it remembered who she was before it all broke. Vaughn waited at the porch steps. Boots polished, coat clean. He said nothing until she reached him. "You look like spring," he said, soft, like something that came through the cold and lived. Reverend Beach spoke without flourish. The vows were simple, just truth, the kind spoken by people who had nothing left to prove. Mrs. Lyall from the next ranch brought plum preserves as a gift. They ate bread and honey on the porch. Vaughn poured coffee. The boys chased each other past the fence line. Veronica didn't say much. She just sat close enough to feel Vaughn's knee against hers and watched her sons run without fear. "I never thought I'd see a day like this," she said. "You made it happen," he replied. "Not alone." "No," he said, "not anymore." The days that followed didn't change much, but they didn't need to. Veronica still rose early, still kneaded dough, still checked the firebox and ground beans, but she no longer worked like she was proving her right to exist. She moved through the house like it belonged to her, because it did. One evening, Vaughn returned from the north pasture, dust streaking his coat. He handed Matthew a small wax paper bundle. "Found wild plums. Figured your mama might know what to do with them." The boy ran inside. hollering for a jar. Veronica crossed her arms. You've been riding all day, and the first thing you do is hand off fruit. You always make something better out of nothing. She tilted her head. You're not afraid of giving? No, he said, even when it doesn't come back. He glanced toward the barn. It does now. Later that night, she found Matthew asleep beside Vaughn's boots, a sliver of plum still clutched in his sticky hand. She carried him upstairs, brushed his hair back from his brow. When she came down, Vaughn was by the window. You ever think of stopping? She asked. Stopping what? Trying, hoping, offering things. I used to, he said. Now, I think some folks were just meant to give. She stepped closer. And if I never fully get used to this, then we'll build slow. He cupped her jaw. Nothing rushed, ever lasted out here anyway. She leaned into him. And for the first time in her life, she let someone else carry the silence. Part 5. The comb, the creek, and the quiet. Years passed. The way. Spring water carves a canyon. Not fast, but permanent. Not every day was soft. Not every season was kind. But the house stood, and so did they. They didn't mark their anniversary with flowers or fuss, just with things made by hand. A new fence rail, a fresh stall, bread that rose just right. A place that no longer asked for anything but their presence. Micah grew tall, took to his own gelding, rode out at dawn, came back dust-covered and calm, telling stories at supper in a voice that no longer hesitated. Matthew followed behind him, like a shadow stitched from sunlight. He carved whistles from pine, tucked them into drawers, into pockets, into the calloused hands of ranch hands, too shy to ask for joy. One afternoon, years after she first stepped off that freight wagon, Veronica stood by the creek, hands on her hips, watching her sons try to wrangle a stray calf. They weren't boys anymore, not really, and she wasn't lost anymore, not even a little. Vaughn came up behind her, wrapped an arm around her waist. They'll figure it out, he said. She leaned back into him. I know, she whispered. That's the part that scares me. That winter, on their 10th anniversary, he handed her a small box. Inside was a comb carved from dark walnut, its grain polished smooth, the teeth even. Made it from the tree that split near the north fence, he said. Didn't want to waste something that stood that long. She turned it in her palm, ran her thumb along the edge. You never forget, do you? No, he said, not the good things. She wore that comb every Sunday, even when her hands began to stiffen, even when her knees ached in the cold. She braided her hair slow and steady, just like she used to tie stitches in shirts she no longer had to patch. One spring evening, they sat on the porch. Micah was down by the barn, teaching a new ranch hand how to rein a mule. Matthew was chasing a stray cat around the porch rails, laughing so hard he fell twice. Veronica leaned her head on Vaughn's shoulder. I used to think peace meant quiet, she said. It doesn't? No, it just means not being afraid of the noise. They didn't speak for a while. The sun dipped low. Cattle called in the distance. The porch wood creaked beneath their boots. Inside, the blue calico dress was folded in a cedar chest, still smelled of wood smoke and thyme. The chipped mug had long been swept away, but in its place were 4 cups, each one chosen, not carried. Micah came up the steps, taller than Vaughn now, storm coming from the west. He said, I tied down the tarp. Good. Vaughn nodded. You staying in tonight? Vaughn glanced at Veronica, then nodded again. I've got what I need right here. Micah grinned. The kind of grin that only comes from knowing you're safe. Then he disappeared inside. Matthew followed a minute later, still holding a bit of string. Mama. Yes, sweetheart. Do you remember that song you used to hum when we were little? She paused. I think so. Can you sing it again? She smiled. Not tonight, but I'll hum it while I bake tomorrow. Deal, he said. and slipped through the door like a whisper. Veronica turned to Vaughn. Did you ever think it would turn out like this? No. Do you still wait for the other boot to drop? He exhaled slow. Sometimes. But then I remember. I never had boots this solid before. She laughed. Soft. Full. Later that night, she opened the window above the sink. The wind carried the smell of sage and warm pine. Somewhere, out by the creek, a frog croaked once and then fell silent. She closed her eyes and listened, not for danger, but for presence. In the barn loft, where she'd once lain alone her first night, Micah had carved something into the beam overhead. Not initials, just 4 names, side by side. No flourish, no date, just truth. She ran her fingers over the grain, then leaned back into Vaughn's chest. She never left the ranch again. She didn't need to. Everything she'd ever lost had returned to her, not in the same shape, but in something better, something earned. She had not been rescued. She had not been rebuilt. She had simply been loved. The fence posts still stand. The wind still moves through the tall grass, like it carries every name ever whispered in hope or fear. And if you stand still near the creek at dusk, real still, you might hear it, the rhythm of footsteps, no longer running, the hush of a woman who's finally found her place, the low hum of a fiddle on the porch, not a song of glory, not even of triumph, but something rarer, a life earned. Veronica never became famous, never made headlines, never told her boys what it cost to cross half a country with nothing but a satchel and their names on her tongue. She didn't need to, because some stories don't echo loud. They settle deep, and they stay. And Vaughn, he never changed much, still didn't speak unless it mattered, still wore his boots out slow, still watched her like she was the one thing the land hadn't managed to take. Every Sunday, he brushed the dust from that walnut comb in her hair, and when the fiddle came out, he played one song, theirs. Tell us, what did this story stir in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments and rate it from 0 to 10. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a ride, because the next tale, it goes even deeper. If you've ever chosen steadiness over spectacle, if you've ever offered love without needing to hear it back first, if you've ever built something small, quiet, and real, then this porch is yours. 2. If you've ever chosen silence over revenge, comment, I understand, Veronica. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, let the land remember you kindly. A cowboy lived alone for 8 years until one beaten woman gave him a reason to stay. Before we ride into this story, take a moment to drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from, what town or city you're calling home tonight. And when the end of this story comes, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now lean back, get comfortable, and enjoy the story. She didn't knock with her hand. She collapsed with her whole body onto the porch of a man who hadn't spoken to another soul in 8 years. No name, no shoes, blood in her lashes, a whisper like a prayer, just one word, mercy. And without asking why, he carried her inside. That was the night Elijah Boon lit the lantern in the back room again, the one that hadn't burned since the day he buried his wife. The sun didn't rise that morning. It peeled its way across the plains, scraping firelight over dry earth like it was trying to wake something long dead. Elijah Boon sat in the same porch chair he'd used every morning since 1879, coffee tin in one hand, rifle leaning lazy against the wall. The breeze whistled through the grass, and the land made no sound back. That's how he liked it. Silence wasn't just comfort for him, it was penance. His voice hadn't been used in years for anything but reading scripture to himself, or cussing out a mule too slow to haul. 8 years since Martha passed, Fever took her in 3 nights flat. After that, the ranch stayed quiet. Ezekiel never remarried, never wandered, just fenced the north pasture, tended the horses, ate beans straight from the pot, and didn't answer when folks tried to ask how he was. The people of Elorhorn had long ago decided he was more ghost than man. A reliable ghost, hauls his own feed, minds his own business, good with his hands, quiet with his past. But that morning, the wind brought something different, a shimmer out on the ridge. Not a wagon, not a rider, just movement, unsteady, human. Ezekiel squinted into the heat. Could have been a mirage. The plains played tricks when the sky got hungry. But then the shape staggered. Closer, barefoot, torn dress, clinging like rags. And when she dropped right there, just shy of the first step, he didn't reach for his rifle. He just stood like he'd been waiting for this collapse. She was young, but not fragile. Face bloodied, one eye swollen shut. Dust caked in the corners of her mouth. Looked like someone had tried to beat the fight out of her and failed. Ezekiel didn't ask her name, didn't ask what happened. He just lifted her light as a branch snapped too soon and carried her inside. The bed had been empty since Martha, still made every week, still smelled like cedar and ghosts. He laid the woman down, fetched water, and began to clean the wounds no one else had stayed to tend. Her lips moved once, one word, mercy. Ezekiel didn't answer. He dipped the cloth and wiped the blood from her jaw again. By dusk, she was sleeping, and for the first time in 8 years, the back room lantern flickered soft against the walls. Not for light, just to push the dark back a little farther. Part 1. The lantern that hadn't burned in 8 years. The wind didn't knock that night. It simply paused, held its breath, as Ezekiel Boon stood over the woman he'd carried into his cabin. No questions, no name, no rifle in hand, just her, soaked and broken, laid gently in the bed that hadn't held another soul since Martha passed. Her skin burned like embered coals. Her dress clung in tatters, more memory than fabric, and her lips, dry and split, had managed just one word before darkness took her. Mercy. Ezekiel hadn't answered. Not with words, only silence, only action. He took his place in the old rocking chair beside her, boots planted firm on the wooden floor, a basin of cool water at his feet. The rag in his hand moved slow, steady mopping the blood and sweat from her brow, the same way he'd once tended fences, horses, and heartache. Quietly, she didn't wake that first night, just breathed in fractured rhythm, the fever rattling through her like wind through bare branches, and beside her, the lantern burned. It hadn't been lit in 8 years, not since the day Ezekiel buried Martha beneath the oak. It wasn't for light. Now, it was to hold back the dark. By morning, her fingers twitched. Her lashes fluttered like moth wings. Ezekiel stepped out to feed the mare. He left a mug of broth on the table. When he returned, it was empty. She was awake, watching him, not afraid, just cautious, like a stray animal, too used to boot heels and broken promises. You fed me, she murmured. He gave a quiet nod. You were starving. She looked down at her hands, at the bruises circling her wrists like shackles still clinging. Did I bleed on your floor? You did. She blinked. Sorry. He poured a tin of water and passed it over. She drank slow, like it was sacrament. They didn't speak again that day. Instead, he read aloud from the old family Bible. Psalms mostly, his voice flat, unhurried, more for himself than for her. By the third day, she stood on her own. Barely. She tried to wash a dish. He took it gently from her hands. She flinched, waiting for the blow. But he only dried it, set it on the shelf, and walked away. By the 5th day, the whispers started. Jedediah Crane brought them with him. Smirking from his saddle, as Ezekiel rode into town for oats. "Heard you got a woman holed up out there," Jed said, real casual-like. "Some folks think she's trouble. Some say she's running from worse." Ezekiel didn't blink. Jed leaned in, voice oily. "I say trouble draws flies. Zeke, careful you don't get bit." That evening, Ezekiel told her. The town was stirring. She didn't cry, didn't ask what they said, just nodded once. "I'll leave," she said softly. "Soon." "You got somewhere to be." She hesitated. "No." "Then stay." She looked at him long, as if testing the edges of his kindness, seeing if it would snap. But he just nodded and stepped out onto the porch. After that, a rhythm settled in. He brewed the coffee. She swept the floors. At night, she read aloud, her voice a quiet thread, stitching warmth into the walls again. He never asked her name. She never offered. Until one morning, while pouring water into the basin, she said it. "Pearl." He didn't ask for more, just nodded once. "Ezekiel." And that was all. That evening, the wind picked up again. The porch boards creaked like bones remembering. Ezekiel turned in early, and on his pillow, a ribbon, moss green, no note, no reason. He sat there, turning it over in his hand, then folded it twice and tucked it gently into the pocket over his chest. Outside, Pearl swept the last of the dust from the porch, humming a tune only the old hills would recognize. And inside, the lantern kept burning, still not for light, but for hope. Part 2. The weight of her name. The snow didn't fall that morning. It waited, hung there, in the sky like a breath, not yet released, as if the world knew something was coming and didn't want to interrupt. Inside the cabin, neither of them spoke. Pearl had swept the floor without being asked, folded the quilt without thanks. Ezekiel had left her the full pot of coffee on the stove, though she hadn't taken a sip since the day she arrived. Their silence had changed shape, no longer armor, but something quieter, a kind of agreement made without words. But the world outside didn't honor quiet things. Ezekiel felt it first, not in the wind, not in his eyes, but in his chest, that old ache that had always warned him truer than any weather vane. He stepped outside. The tracks were back, not just one set this time. 3, one dragging a limp, one lighter, nimble, one heavy like a man, carrying something dark inside. When he returned to the cabin, Pearl was at the stove. Just beans, but she stirred them like they mattered. "You expecting someone?" she asked, still facing the pot. He shook his head. "But they might be expecting you." She set the spoon down slowly, turned to face him, eyes tired, still rimmed in shadow. "I didn't mean to bring trouble." "You didn't," he said gently. It was already out there. That night, she didn't sleep. He heard her pacing the floor, quiet as breath. Once, her bare feet stopped just outside his door. The wood creaked as she leaned against it. She never knocked, just stood there like someone who needed to be sure another heart was still beating on the other side. By morning, the frost had set in. Her hands were red with cold when she passed him his coat at the porch, and he noticed something different. Her jaw clenched tight, like a woman who'd heard too many threats, whispered in too many kitchens. "You got a last name?" he asked. "Just once." She shook her head. "I left it behind." He didn't press. But the town never learned when to stop. The gossip drifted in on the same wind that carried the snow. At the trading post, Jedediah Crane leaned against the rail and smirked, tapped his pipe twice. "She better be worth it." "Boon," he said, "'cause her past's coming on horseback." Ezekiel didn't flinch, didn't answer, just loaded the oats and rode home slow. But Pearl had heard. On the 7th morning, she didn't come down. He found her packing what little she owned into a flour sack, hands trembling, but her jaw still locked like a door. "I've worn out my welcome," she said without turning. "No." You haven't? I'm not a stray cat. You can feed out of pity. I know that. She paused, still didn't meet his eyes. They said I ran, that I seduced men for shelter, that I don't belong anywhere. He looked at her, really looked, held her in his gaze like someone holding something fragile, not because it might break, but because it already had. You're not what they say. Her fingers loosened. The sack slipped from her hands and fell soft to the floor. I don't want to bring you shame, she whispered. I buried shame with Martha, he said. All that's left here is peace, and you've got a right to that, too. She didn't cry. Not yet. That night, they sat on the porch again. The wind had calmed, but the sky still looked restless. She brought out a needle and thread for the first time, sewing the frayed cuff of his shirt in silence. I used to sew while he drank, she said after a while. It made the silence feel like mine. Ezekiel took the shirt, folded it slow. It's yours now, too. Later that week, they hauled water together. The air smelled like wood smoke and old decisions. And as they walked, Pearl spoke barely above the wind. I used to dream of a little patch of land. Nothing big. Tomatoes, maybe onions. The next morning, he left a small tin of seeds on her plate. Tomato, squash, onion. She didn't speak, just pressed it to her chest, like something sacred. I'd like that, she finally said. But peace? Peace in the West is a glass thing. It shines, sure, but it shatters easy. That Sunday, a man in a gray coat rode into town, said he was looking for a woman named Pearl, said she was a thief, said she owed debts she hadn't paid. Jedediah brought the news with the same grin. She better be worth it. Boon. Ezekiel didn't speak, but that night, he didn't sleep either. He sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, watching the road. The lantern inside stayed lit until dawn. And inside, Pearl lay beneath the quilt, tracing its edge with her fingertip, whispering into the dark. Don't let them take this from me. He heard, didn't speak, didn't move, but he stayed on the porch all night because the wind had shifted. And this time, it wasn't just carrying dust. It was carrying reckoning, and it was coming straight for them. Part 3. The road doesn't own me anymore. Pearl was gone. Ezekiel found the note folded beside the coffee pot. Plain, careful, pressed flat, like it was holding back more than just ink. I need to walk into town alone. I won't be a secret anymore. I won't make you stand between me and them. If this ends, it ends with me standing on my own 2 feet. He didn't curse, didn't call out. Just stood there, the note resting between his fingers, while morning light crawled up the cabin wall like it was trying not to disturb anything. He saddled the mare slow. Rage sat in his ribs, not loud, not sharp, just patient. The kind of thunder that waits behind the hills. But he didn't ride after her. Not yet, because he knew Pearl, knew the quiet kind of pride it takes to leave a note instead of slipping away in the dark. She wanted this, to be seen, to be enough on her own. But he also knew Clayton North, a man with eyes like winter stone and a limp that didn't slow the weight of his cruelty. By midday, the town was already humming. Betsy Lou swore she saw Pearl at the mercantile, buying flour and soap, paying in coins she'd sewn into the hem of her apron, didn't flinch when the whispers started. And when Clayton stepped in behind her, grinning like sin that hadn't been punished yet, she didn't run. He said something low, something meant to bend her, but she didn't flinch, didn't fold. She turned, faced him, and the shopkeeper swore her voice rang like a church bell. I am not your property. That's when Ezekiel walked through the door. No shout, no gun, just presence. Solid and calm, like the land itself had chosen a side. She belongs to herself, he said. Clayton's laugh was small, cold. This ain't about love, cowboy. It's about debt. She ran off with medicine, horse feed, jewelry, all Vernon's. She's a thief. A widow! A lie? The room stilled. Even the deputy near the door looked unsure. The shopkeeper's wife slipped into the back, and outside, somewhere, a dog barked once, then nothing. Ezekiel didn't move. I don't care what she did, he said, voice like steady ground. She's not going anywhere with you. Clayton's jaw ticked. That your final word? It is. And then, Pearl stepped forward. She touched Ezekiel's arm, not to hide, to stand taller. You say I stole? She said. Maybe I did. But not from you. I stole ours. Stole sunlight. Stole back a little piece. I stole a life, my life, that you tried to take from me. Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. Clayton spat at her feet. You're not worth a bullet. And he left. No brawl, no blood. But he left a promise in the silence. That night, the house didn't sleep. Pearl sat by the lantern, staring at her reflection in the glass. Ezekiel poured her tea. She didn't drink. He's not done, she said softly. I know. She turned toward him, her eyes bare. Brave. I don't want to run again. You won't? He placed his hand over hers. Not tight, just enough to say I'm here. If he comes back, she whispered. I'll be waiting. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But something passed between them. Something truer than lips or vows. A kind of trust that doesn't ask for proof. A kind of belonging that doesn't beg to be kept. The next morning, they planted tomatoes. That afternoon, they painted the barn door red, soft, clay red like the hills at dusk. Each brushstroke felt like defiance. Each seed pressed into the dirt whispered, we are staying. And that night, when she left her moss-green ribbon on his pillow again, this time tied in a knot, he didn't ask, didn't speak, just untied it, pressed it to his chest, and closed his eyes. Because some things are promises, even when no one says a word. Part 4. Under the willow, they stood. The sky was gold that morning, not yellow, not pale, gold, like melted coins spilled across the prairie, glinting off fence posts and dewdrops. It was a sky too honest for lies, too quiet for fear, too sacred for anything less than truth. Ezekiel rose before the rooster crowed, washed with water drawn from the well, his hands moving steady and sure. No rush, no noise, just purpose. He dressed slow, the white shirt Pearl had mended, its cuffs still stiff. The old hat Martha gave him back when time still stretched wide like summer fields. He cleaned his boots twice, not for pride, but because some mornings ask for reverence. He didn't check the mirror, just button every button, like each one was a prayer. Pearl had already been up. He found her by the barn, not waiting just there, present as morning itself. She wore a cream dress that swayed at her ankles, her hair braided down her back, soft wildflowers tucked into the green ribbon he now knew better than his own name. She wasn't smiling, not yet, but her eyes were steady, and that steadiness, it undid him. You sure? Ezekiel asked, voice raw from sleep and something deeper. I've never been sure of anything, she said. Not until this. He offered his arm. She took it, and together they walked side by side toward the old willow at the edge of the fence line. That tree had stood longer than either of them, its branches low and swaying, like weathered hands reaching out to bless. Beneath it stood the preacher, gray-bearded, pipe smoke clinging to his coat. He didn't ask for rehearsed vows, just tipped his hat to Pearl. You sure this is what you want? Miss. She nodded once. I'm not property, and I'm not asking for permission. He cleared his throat and began. No crowd, just Betsy Lau with a basket of petals, barefoot and wide-eyed. Jedediah Crane stood at the back, arms folded, not smiling, but there. And sometimes, presence is its own kind of benediction. The words were plain. Ezekiel's hand didn't tremble when he took hers, and Pearl's voice only caught once, when she said, you never asked for anything. and somehow gave me everything. To which Ezekiel answered, I buried my past in silence. Somehow, you made me speak again. The preacher bowed his head, murmured an old psalm into the breeze. No applause, no music, but the wind shifted, soft, round, sacred. They kissed once, no heat, no rush, just reverence, like the land itself had been waiting for that very moment. Then the shot, sharp, distant, but real. Everyone flinched. Ezekiel turned first, already moving in front of Pearl, hand at the rifle. Jedediah reached for the shotgun on the fence rail. Betsy Lou crouched low, one hand covering her gasp. Another shot. Closer now. From the ridge trail, Clayton stepped through the trees, rifle in hand, jaw locked with hate. Two men flanked him, coats slick, eyes dead. Not law, just hired hands. You married her. Clayton growled. You think that changes a damn thing? You think a kiss clears her debt? Pearl didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her voice calm. Clear. You want to collect something, she said. Try dignity. Clayton spat. You stole. You ran. You wore my cousin's name and his ring. Slept in his bed. Then took what didn't belong to you. She never belonged to him. Ezekiel said, or you. Clayton stepped closer. One of his men's fingers twitched near the trigger. You think you can protect her? He sneered. You've got one rifle. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats. Not one, not three, a dozen. From behind the house, down the ridge. Riders, ranchers, the blacksmith, the undertaker, even the deputy. Old men, quiet men, tired men, but all of them watching. No rifles drawn, but their eyes did the speaking. Clayton turned, his jaw set. Jedediah spoke first. You boys want a war. Then you'll be wearing with every man here who knows what it costs to earn your name in this town. The deputy stepped forward. And I'll be watching every bullet that flies. Clayton saw it then. This wasn't just about Pearl anymore. It was about who this town would be. When the dust settled, he growled something low, turned, spat in the dirt, and rode off. His men followed, but slower, like they knew they hadn't just lost a bounty. They'd lost their place. When the dust finally settled, no one spoke. Pearl's knees gave way. Ezekiel caught her, held her close, tighter than before, like he was anchoring her to the earth itself. I don't want to be a guest here anymore, she whispered. You're not, he said, his arms around her, his voice solid as cedar. Your home. Part 5. The light that stayed. They didn't leave the house for 3 days, not out of fear, but because for the first time, there was nothing chasing them. No footsteps in the distance. No names whispered in anger. No debts to dodge or doors to lock twice. The porch held them at sunrise side by side, mugs in hand, steam curling up into the quiet. The soil behind the chicken coop bore neat rows of planted seed. Her shawl now hung by the door. His rifle rested against the wall, untouched since the wedding. No one in town spoke of the standoff. Not Jedediah, not the deputy, not the ones who once whispered behind coffee cups and fence posts, who now only nodded as they passed. The peace was thin, sure, like morning frost on bare wood, but it held, and sometimes that's enough. Pearl moved through the house now, like she'd always belonged. No hesitations, no apologies. Windows thrown open to let the breeze in. A hum in her throat as she swept. She fixed the drawer that stuck, hung 2 towels on the rack, baked bread without asking, not because it was expected, but because it was hers. In the evenings, Ezekiel would sometimes find her out by the tomato rows, barefoot, quiet, eyes on the horizon as the dirt grew green again. One dusk, he came out half-buttoned, holding a jar of tea. You waiting on someone? He asked. She shook her head, slow and soft. I'm remembering. I don't have to anymore. He didn't reply, but he stood beside her until the stars came out to keep watch. One morning, He found a note on his pillow, just 4 words, written in her tidy hand. "You made me stay." He folded it, tucked it into the vest pocket where her ribbon already lived, said nothing. Because some truths don't ask to be spoken. They only ask to be carried. A week later, Betsy Lou came by with a bundle of fabric scraps, leftovers and memories, faded cloth with no place to be. Pearl smiled, touched them with her fingertips, and said, "I think I'll make a quilt, one with no names, just colors, just warmth." That evening, they walked the edge of the land together. No destination, no need, just the kind of walking folks do when they know they're not going anywhere. They stopped by the willow, and without a word, he took her hand, same way he had beneath its branches on the day of their vows. She looked up at him. "I never thought I'd feel safe," she whispered. "You're safe," he answered. Then, a sound, distant, hooves, just one rider, up on the ridge, still, watching, didn't move, didn't wave, just sat there, like a ghost that hadn't figured out where to go next. Pearl stiffened. Ezekiel stepped a little closer, voice calm. "He ain't riding down. If he was gonna, he would have already." She let out a breath, not relief exactly. More like release. "They'll always be out there," she said quietly. He nodded. "And we'll always be in here." That night, Pearl lit the lantern herself, set it in the window, didn't say why, just let it burn. Through the hush, through the dark, all the way to morning, just in case. A quiet house, weathered and whole. A lantern glows gold in the window. Her ribbon tied gently around the curtain rod. In the corner, a tin of seeds, unopened, but waiting. And up on the ridge, the lone rider turns his horse and fades into the horizon. Some stories don't end with a kiss. They end with a porch light left burning, a ribbon tied around a curtain rod, and 2 people who finally believed they didn't have to run anymore. Ezekiel Boon never stopped mourning Martha, and Pearl never truly outran what was done to her. But somewhere between coffee at dawn and tomato seeds pressed into warm dirt, they built a life that didn't ask them to forget, only to stay. No law was rewritten, no badge returned, just a man who lit a lantern and a woman who dared to stand in its glow. They never chased the rider on the ridge because they'd already claimed what mattered. What did this story stir in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments and rate it from 0 to 10. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a ride if this story touched something deep in you. The next one goes even deeper, and if you've ever chosen silence over revenge, comment below. I understand Ezekiel. Until next time, traveler, the fire's still burning. And the stories, they're far from over. Struggling cowboy lived alone for years until 10 wounded girls collapsed at his gate. But why? Before we ride into this story, take a moment to drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from, what town or city you're calling home tonight. And when the end this story, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Now lean back, get comfortable, and enjoy the story. She had walked for weeks through snow and silence, her arms cradling the last child who could still draw breath. The others followed in a wavering line, thin shadows against the white, their faces streaked with soot and blood, their feet bare and bleeding. And on that bitter Dakota night, the wind drove them to the door of a man who had buried his heart with his wife and child. When he opened it, the porch groaned under the weight of 10 small bodies. Comanche girls, wounded and half frozen, their silence louder than any scream. It was the moment his tomb became a threshold, and hers, a place she might dare to stop running. The Dakota wind had a way of stripping a man down to the bone, not just his body, but whatever was left of his spirit, for Silas Blackwood, it had been doing that for 5 long years. Once, he'd been a husband and a father. Once, he'd been a soldier, a field medic who could stitch a man back together with nothing but a needle, boiled water, and a prayer. But diphtheria had taken his Sarah and their boy, Daniel. In the span of a week after that, Silas put down the life he'd been carrying and walked away from the world. Now, his cabin was little more than a single-room tomb on the edge of the plains, where the wind was his only conversation and the hawk circling overhead his only neighbor. He lived by the hour, not the day. The fire in the hearth was for heat, not comfort. The stew in the pot was for fuel, not pleasure. Every morning, he checked his traps. Every evening, he mended what the weather had torn. That night, late autumn, 1876, the air smelled of coming snow. Silas was at the table, whittling a piece of pine without much thought, when he heard it. Not the wind, not a coyote, something softer, thinner, human. Rifle in hand, he opened the door a crack. The wind snatched at it, dragging in the smell of pine and the iron-sharp tang of blood. There they were, 10 of them, a tangle of torn buckskin, matted hair, bare feet blue with cold. The oldest, barely more than a girl herself, had her arms wrapped around the smallest one, her body curved in a shield. Her eyes were black pits of fear and defiance. She met his gaze like a cornered wolf. Silas didn't ask who they were, didn't ask where they'd come from. He simply stooped, lifting the 2 smallest, their bones weightless, in his arms, and carried them inside. Then he went back, again and again, until all 10 were laid before the fire. The cabin was suddenly full, the air thick with their shivering breath, their silence like a living thing. Silas knew that, just as the snow outside would soon bury every track in the world, this moment would bury the life he'd been living. He closed the door against the rising storm and looked at the oldest girl and wondered, would she dare to stay? Part 1. The storm came quick, the way they do on the high Dakota plains, a clean, white fury, swallowing every trail, every horizon. By morning, the world beyond the cabin walls would be nothing but a blank page. But inside, another kind of storm had taken root. Silas moved with the same grim precision that had carried him through battlefields and the hollow years that followed. He set another log on the fire, careless of the sparks that leapt toward his sleeve. Then he knelt beside the nearest child, a girl with ash-smudged cheeks and lips pale as winter sky. He touched the back of his hand to her face, cold, far too cold. One by one, he checked them. Knife cuts, burns where cloth had fused to skin, bruises blooming dark across fragile ribs. He set water to boil in the black iron pot, the hiss of steam the only sound in the room. Whiskey served as both cleanser and courage. With the steady hands of a man who'd stitched dying boys under cannon fire, he cleaned their wounds and sewed the deeper gashes closed. He worked in silence, breath measured, face set like stone. The girls didn't thank him. They didn't speak at all. Their eyes alone moved, following him the way deer track the shadow of a wolf. The eldest, her gaze black as polished obsidian, placed herself between him and the younger ones. When he reached for a child, her hand twitched toward a knife that wasn't there. Watchfulness was all she had left, and she wore it like armor. Silas understood. Trust was a currency they had no reason to spend. By the second day, the blizzard had sealed them in. Snow drifted high against the cabin walls, the wind's low moan threading through the chinks in the logs. The fire never slept. Silas fed it with every stick and split log he'd saved for the winter. When the pot emptied, he filled it again. Broth, stretched thin with rabbit meat from his traps. At night, he didn't take the bed. Instead, he sat in the chair by the door, rifle across his knees, old soldier's habit. The man on watch doesn't lie down. The girls huddled together under blankets, breath rising in faint white wisps toward the rafters. In the half-light, their stillness echoed too much of the photograph on his mantel. Sarah's gentle smile, Daniel's small hand clutching her sleeve, and there it was again, that cold knot lodged deep in his chest, the wound that had never healed. He had failed them, failed to keep them breathing, laughing, living. No fight, no skill had been enough to keep them from the grave. That truth had driven him here, to a cabin built for one, but now there were 10 small, fragile lives in his keeping. And for the first time in years, he felt the old, dangerous, stirring the instinct to protect. He didn't welcome it. He feared it, because the last time he'd felt it, he'd lost everything. On the third morning, as pale light bled through the shutters, he found himself carving without thought, the knife whispering through pine. When he stopped, a small deer sat in his palm, head turned, as if listening. He set it on the mantel, said nothing. By dusk, it was gone. He found it later, clutched in the sleeping fist of the smallest girl. That night, Silas sat in his chair, staring into the fire. The wind screamed outside, inside. 10 breathing reasons to keep the rifle loaded and the door barred. He thought of the deer in that tiny hand, thought of Sarah's voice, soft as a lullaby, and wondered if, perhaps, the tomb he had built around himself had begun to crack. Part 2. The blizzard was no longer a storm. It was a wall. Day after day, the cabin floated in a white, soundless sea, cut off from everything but the slow, steady breathing of those inside. The air grew thick with the mingled scents of smoke, simmering broth, pine resin, and the faint sour tang of damp wool drying by the hearth. Silas kept himself moving splitting wood, tending the fire, checking traps when the wind eased. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling. And feeling was a luxury he had long since sworn off. The girls kept to their silence, but their eyes never rested. He could read the language of fear as easily as he could read fresh tracks in snow. The younger ones flinched at the sharp crack of the fire. The older ones glanced toward the door whenever the wind howled, as if it carried the voices of men they had known too well. And always, there was Nami, motionless, watchful, her gaze fixed like a mountain cat guarding the mouth of her den. He gave them space when he set out bowls of broth. He did it without a word. Nami would taste each one first, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly if the flavor shifted, as if even here, in this barren nowhere, danger could seep in through the food. When he changed their bandages, her dark eyes followed every movement of his hands. She was not yet weighing whether to trust him. She was deciding whether she could afford the risk. On the 5th day, the knife found its way into his palm again. This time, when he stopped carving, a hawk sat in his hand, wings folded tight, eyes forward, already choosing its prey. He left it on the table. By morning, it was gone. He didn't search for it, but later that night, he saw the second youngest girl, holding it close against her chest as she slept, the sharp beak and folded wings standing guard over her dreams. It was a small exchange, but in the quiet language they were learning together, a language without words. It was loud. And then, one afternoon, the exchange came the other way. He had been outside breaking ice from the water trough when he noticed something different about his shirt. At the elbow, where the wool had worn thin, a small square of fabric had been neatly sewn into place. The stitches were fine, deliberate. He turned toward the cabin. Through the rippled glass, he saw Nami at the fire. Her head bent as she wove another girl's hair into a long braid. It was the first gift he had received in 5 years. He said nothing, but that night, his calloused fingers found the patch again and again, tracing the careful work as though it might vanish. But for every small thread of trust they stitched between them, something darker was weaving itself outside. That evening, running the trap line through the near woods, Silas paused on a low rise and let his gaze sweep the frozen horizon. Through the drifting snow, far off along the northern ridge, he saw them 3 riders, moving slow and deliberate, not wandering, not lost. They kept a line, their pace too measured to be chance. They weren't traders. They weren't neighbors. His jaw tightened. He turned for home, the wind cutting his face like shards of glass. He would say nothing. Not yet. Not until he knew for certain. That night, while the girls slept in their bundled warmth, firelight shifting gold across their faces, Silas sat in his chair by the door, rifle across his knees. His eyes stayed fixed on the black beyond the shutters. Whatever had driven those children through the snow to his cabin, it wasn't done with them. And now, because he had let them in, it wasn't done with him. Part 3. The riders came again. 3 black shapes on the frozen horizon, creeping closer with the patience of hunters, measuring the land between themselves and the cabin day after day. Step by deliberate step. Silas didn't tell the girls, but Nami knew. Somehow, she always knew. Her eyes followed him now whenever he went to the door. When he returned from the trap line, snow crusting his coat, she would look past him toward the ridge. Each time, her jaw set a little harder, like a lock turned 1 notch tighter. It was during one of those wordless glances that the first crack in her wall showed. That night, a child screamed in her sleep, a sharp, sudden cry, the kind that drags a man straight from the depths of slumber. Silas was on his feet before thought caught up, rifle in hand, eyes sweeping for danger. Then he remembered where he was. By the fire's glow, Nami was already moving toward the small bundle of blankets. She gathered the girl in her arms and rocked her gently, whispering words in Comanche low, rhythmic, heavy with grief. Her voice caught once, and she bit it back. Silas turned away, granting her the privacy she didn't ask for but surely needed. Still, the picture in his mind was growing clearer. Whoever those riders were, they weren't strangers to the fear living in this room. 2 days later, the truth began to surface, not in full confession, but in fragments. It lived in the way the older girls startled at a man's voice outside, in Nami's white-knuckled hold on the smallest child, whenever the wind carried the echo of hoofbeats. And then it came, sudden as a crack in winter ice, when she finally broke their silent bargain. They were working near the hearth. Nami and 2 older girls bent over their mending, Silas patching a split log with resin. The storm outside had eased to a pale curtain of snow, the sort of quiet that makes a man listen harder without looking at him. She spoke. Men, bluecoats, no warriors left. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, the words slow, deliberate. She didn't look up, but her needle froze in the cloth. Silas didn't push her, didn't ask for more. He knew sometimes the telling is heavier than the memory itself, so he waited. In the days that followed, the pieces came in drips and shadows, not from her lips alone, but from the nightmares that gripped the girls, from a name Thorn spat like a curse between clenched teeth. Then, one morning, as he was cleaning his rifle, Nami stepped up to him. She didn't meet his eyes. Her gaze stayed on the weapon. "Show me," she said. It had been years since he'd taught anyone to shoot. Years since he'd stood in snow, correcting a stance. The angle of shoulders, the slow squeeze of a trigger. Her hands were steady, the steadiness of someone already tempered by loss. She took the rifle as if it were weightless, though the stock ran nearly the length of her arm. He showed her how to rest her cheek against the wood, how to breathe before the shot. The first report cracked through the frozen trees, scattering a black cloud of crows into the pale sky. She didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed fixed on her mark, her breath slow, her jaw set, and in that moment, Silas saw something he recognized, not the hunger to kill, but the will to protect, the same iron line that had once run through him on battlefields, long gone. Back inside, he leaned the rifle within her reach. She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was no suspicion in her eyes, and he knew then, whatever was coming down out of that white horizon would find more than one defender standing in its way. That night, through the rattling shutters, men's voices rode the wind, too far to catch the words, but close enough for the tone to chill his blood. Somewhere beyond that northern ridge, Colonel Thorne was drawing his circle tighter. Silas stoked the fire high, the flames throwing restless shadows across the log walls. He looked at the 10 small forms huddled under their blankets, and for the first time in 5 long years, the thought of dying didn't feel like surrender. It felt like purpose. Part 4. The wind has a way of warning a man before trouble comes. That morning, it blew sharp from the north, heavy with the taste of iron and the flat promise of snow yet to fall. By afternoon, the ridge beyond the cabin had vanished beneath a curtain of white, but Silas knew they were out there. He could feel it in his bones. He worked with the same calm that had carried him through every impossible hour of his life. Shutters barred, leaving only narrow slits for a rifle's eye. Sacks of flour and potatoes stacked waist-high against the door. The root cellar cleared, lined with blankets. Every movement measured. Deliberate a man, laying stones in a wall. He might have to die behind. When the last of it was done, he looked to Nami. Her dark eyes didn't waver. The cellar, he said quietly, when I tell you, you take them. Stay put, no matter what you hear. For a moment, she studied him, snow, soft light shifting across her face. Then she gave a single, short nod, the nod of someone who had already decided she would not run. By dusk, the blizzard was upon them. Snow, swept in sheets, so dense a man could disappear 6 feet away. It was the kind of storm that kills the careless and shields the careful. Nature, for now, was picking a side. Through the howl came the sound, the hollow drum of hooves. A voice followed, riding the wind, slick with command. Silas Blackwood, Colonel Thorne, Dakota Territorial Militia. We know you have them. Send out the Comanche filth, and you live to see the spring. Silas stood at the slit in the shutter, rifle cool and steady in his hands. The ghosts of Sarah and Daniel were silent now. All that remained was the living reason behind him. This is my home, he called back, each word laid like a stone in a wall. They're under my protection. Thorne's laugh was brittle. Have it your way. Traitor! The first shot came a spark off the chimney stone, whining away into the storm. Silas didn't flinch. He sighted on a blur by the woodpile, squeezed the trigger. A man went down, his cry swallowed by the wind. The cabin came alive with gunfire, the sharp crack of rifles, the acrid bite of powder, the thunk of bullets burying themselves in pine. Silas moved from window to window, letting the storm's white fury hide his position. Thorne's men fired blind, their shapes flickering and vanishing in the swirl. He gave the signal. Nami herded the girls into the root cellar, pulled the trapdoor shut. In the dark, she held the smallest ones close, humming a low, tuneless song of her people. But her gaze stayed fixed on the thin crack of light between the boards. Through it, she caught a shadow. A man creeping along the cabin wall, pistol in hand. Silas couldn't see him. Her pulse hammered. She slipped from the cellar, seized the spare rifle from beside the table, and did exactly as he had taught her. Her shot shattered the frame, driving the man into the open. It was all the chance Silas needed. He swung around and fired the threat crumpled into the snow. He saw her then, smoke curling from the barrel, her face pale but fierce. Pride surged in him, hot enough to burn through the cold. They were no longer one protector and 10 charges. They were a line, a stand. The fight pressed close. Thorn himself burst through the door, driven by more than orders, something personal, something vengeful. He was bigger, but Silas carried the rage of a man with nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. The rifles were useless now. It was fists, elbows, boots. 2 men crashing through the cabin and out into the blinding storm. They grappled in the white fury, breath pluming, boots slipping. Thorn's knife found Silas's arm, a hot slash in the cold. But pain only sharpened him. He slammed Thorn against a pine, the man's head striking bark with a dull crack. The blizzard began its slow work. Snow clung to Thorn's face, filled his mouth. His eyes, God will judge you now, Silas rasped, pressing him into the drift. Then he left him there, a sacrifice to the storm's judgment. When Silas staggered back inside, blood darkening his sleeve. The cabin was quiet save for the girl's breathing. Nami rose from the cellar, her fear aimed not at the storm, not at the fight, just past, but at the wound in his arm. She tore a strip from her tunic, pressed it hard against the gash. Her touch was steady, sure, and for the first time in 5 years, Silas let someone else bear his weight. Part 5. The storm didn't break all at once. It lingered, stretching into 2 long days. The world beyond the cabin, sealed in white and silence. Inside, the bite of powder smoke had faded, replaced by the low rustle of blankets, the soft scrape of a kettle on the hearth, and the clean, sharp scent of pine resin poultice. Silas lay propped in the bed he had kept empty for years, the one he hadn't touched since Sarah went to Earth. Now, Nami moved quietly through the room, bringing fresh water, steeping herbs, binding his arm in strips torn from her own clothing. She worked without hesitation, without the wary guard she had carried when they first came. Her touch was sure, her eyes were steady. One by one, the girls began drifting up from the cellar in the daylight. The smallest would curl against Silas's good side, tracing the scars on his hand with tiny fingers. He didn't pull away, not anymore. Days slipped into weeks. The snow softened under a gentler sun, trickling into bright little streams that sang through the hollows. Birdsong returned. The scent of thawed earth seeped through the cabin walls. Silas found himself outside, his arms still stiff, but strong enough to work. He turned over a patch of ground beside the cabin, breaking frost-hard soil. The girls followed, curious. He showed them how to press kernels of corn into the dirt, to cover them gently with soil. Then beans, then squash, the 3 sisters of the plains. Their small hands worked beside his, their laughter rising like the first wildflowers of spring. One evening, he found Nami by the fire with a half-finished blanket in her lap. The pattern was simple, but in its center, she was weaving a hawk-wing spread, head turned as if watching over something unseen. He asked nothing, and she gave no words, but her eyes lifted to his in the firelight, and he knew the hawk was him. That night, after the others slept, Silas went to the mantel. The photograph of Sarah and Daniel waited there, worn soft at the edges from years of being held, stared at, grieved over. He stood with it a long time in his hands. Then he placed it in a small wooden box he had carved himself, closed the lid, and set it away, not forgotten, but no longer the thing that chained him. A week later, he carved again. Not a deer, not a hawk, a woman, straight-backed and proud, her hand extended to a small child. He left it on the table, In the morning, Naomi found it. Her fingers moved over the wood slowly, her lips pressed tight. When she looked at him, her gaze held more than gratitude. It held something deeper, softer, and far more dangerous. Love, born from battle and winter's long watch. Years later, the cabin had changed. An added room stretched along its north wall. A garden lay thick and green under summer sun. Goats grazed on the hillside, their bells chiming faintly in the warm wind. On an evening painted in gold and purple, Silas and Nami stood on the porch, watching 10 young women, no longer girls, chase fireflies through the tall grass. The horizon burned with the kind of light that makes a man stop and breathe deep. Silas reached for her hand, his scarred fingers lacing with hers. She didn't look at him. She didn't have to. Some bonds don't need words. The world had once tried to leave them as ghosts, each alone in their own wilderness. Instead, they had taken the broken pieces of their lives and built something unshakable, a family, rooted deep in the quiet heart of the frontier. The wind was softer now. It carried the smell of cut hay and warm earth, not snow and blood. The cabin that had once been a tomb now stood open to the summer light, its walls carrying the voices of 10 young women, voices that had once been locked in silence. Silas Blackwood, the man who had buried his heart 5 years before, now stood on the porch beside the woman who had walked barefoot through the storm to his door. They didn't speak much. They never had to. The language they'd built was quieter than words, a shared glance over the heads of children, the press of a calloused hand into another, the sound of footsteps side by side. If you were to pass their homestead in those years, you'd see the garden thick with beans and corn, the laundry line snapping in the wind, the small herd on the hillside. You might see a hawk wheel high overhead, as if keeping its own watch. You might not guess that the man and woman there had both been to the farthest edge of grief, that they had stood where life felt finished and had somehow found the courage to step back. Tell us, what did this story stir in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments and rate it from 0 to 10. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a ride. Some stories end with a bullet or a grave. This one ends with something rarer, the choice to stay, to build, to keep watch over what you've been given. If you've ever chosen silence over revenge, comment, "I understand, Silas," because family is not always the one you are born into. Sometimes it's the one you fight for. Sometimes it's the one that walks to your door in the middle of a storm. And sometimes it's the one that teaches you how to live again. Cowboy saw his neighbor turn away a mail-order bride. What he did next changed her life. Before we begin, take a moment to drop a comment with your city where you're tuning in from today. And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now, enjoy the story. Montana Territory, late June, 1880. The sun hung heavy and hot, baking the trail until the dust rose in gold clouds that lingered in the still air. An old wagon stood alone in front of an empty house, its wheels sunk deep into cracked, dry earth. Beside it, a young woman stood with her shoulders squared. Her dress and bonnet faded from the long road. Her hand clutched a letter that trembled ever so slightly. Lawson Reed reined his horse to a halt. He took the paper, scanned the few blunt words. A rejection, as sharp and cold as a slap. Folding it once, he slipped it into his pocket and looked at her. His voice was low. "Steady, you will not be sleeping out here." No promise, no poetry, just a firm, decent decision that would change both their lives. Montana Territory summer, 1880. The trail home to Lawson's ranch lay dappled in shifting cloud shadows. He had spent the morning checking the southern fence line. But as he topped the last rise, something stopped him cold. In front of Tom Dwyer's place, his neighbor to the west sat a weather-worn wagon. Alone in the yard, the porch was empty, the yard silent. No smoke curling from the chimney. Beside the wagon stood a woman young, straight-backed, the faintest tremor in her shoulders. Her bonnet was frayed at the edges, her dress worn thin from travel. In her hands, a letter shook under the glare of the sun. Lawson didn't have to ask. Tom had been bragging in town about sending for a bride from Chicago. Clearly, he'd changed his mind. She handed him the paper. 2 words stared back at him. Changed my mind. No apology. No explanation. Lawson folded it, slipped it into his pocket, and said quietly, his voice roughened by trail dust, "You will not be sleeping out here." She hesitated. I don't know you." He held her gaze. "That's fair. But you can see I'm not him." The road back to the rail depot was 20 miles of hard heat, and the house behind her was nothing but empty walls. Slowly, she stepped toward him. Lawson hefted her trunk onto the wagon and turned his team toward home. His ranch came into view, a plain white house on a rise, the red barn standing solid beside it. He opened the front door and nodded toward the room nearest the porch. "It has a lock. I'll sleep in the barn." She started to object, but he added, softer this time, "You've had enough men show you the wrong kind of welcome. I won't be another." That evening, he made beans and bread, setting her plate down first before serving himself. They ate in silence, not the strained kind, but the quiet of 2 strangers who'd found a roof to share and a measure of respect between them. It wasn't kindness for show. It wasn't pity. It was the first stone laid in something neither of them yet had a name for. Part 1. A new rhythm. Dawn came slow and quiet. The first light didn't burst in. It slipped through the cracks, like a hand resting gently on your shoulder. Silent but certain, the cottonwood leaves along the creek whispered in the breeze, and the porch boards still held the night's chill, like a secret not yet told. Lawson had already lit the stove, setting the coffee pot on before the birds even thought about singing. He moved without a sound heel to toe, coffee cup set down soft, as if the air itself might break. The door eased shut without a single creak. There are some men you can tell are good just by the way they touch a latch. Genevieve came into the kitchen, wearing the same dress as yesterday, but her hair was different, loosely pinned, with a few strands free against her neck, as if she'd let go of an old rule. She didn't ask where things were. Her hands simply found the sugar tin in the corner, the lid worn bright from use. She stood there, holding her cup in both hands, steam rising in a small cloud between them. The first sip brought a faint color back to her cheeks. They took their coffee to the porch. Out front lay a garden, just barely begun. Rows of dirt, still rough. A fence not quite straight. A scarecrow in a torn shirt, leaning in the wind. Beyond that, the hills lay in patches of light and shadow. Summer spread out like an old quilt. "You're up early," Lawson said, eyes still on the distance. "Habit. Where I used to live." Sleeping late meant getting left behind. He nodded once, tilting his head toward a row of carrots. "You take that side? I'm checking the west fence. I'll take care of it, so long as it stays put till I get there." They stepped off the porch together. The morning dew soaked into her shoes and darkened the leather of his boots. She lifted a hoe and a coil of twine from the railing, testing their weight like a seamstress, feeling the pull of fabric. He loaded wire and nails into the wheelbarrow, pushing it forward, the iron rim humming over stone, the smell of damp earth and fresh leaves mixed in the air. She knelt by the carrot bed, fingers parting weeds, pulling them free as if loosening a stubborn knot. Lawson glanced over, recognizing in her the patience of someone who's done hard work before, not rushed, not yielding. He turned away, not from shyness, but to give her that quiet. By mid-morning, the sun was high. He was setting a nail into a fence post when her shadow fell across him. She held out a dipper of water. He drank, not to the bottom, and handed it back. No one said thank you around here. That word was saved for things that truly needed it. Your rows are straight, he said. I lined them with the house's shadow when the sun came up. Easiest way to cheat. She smiled faintly, then told him about her father, a warehouse foreman in Chicago, where the noise was so thick you couldn't hear your own heartbeat. She looked toward the hills and said quietly, "This is the first time I've heard my own breathing." He drove another nail, slower this time. Out here, every sound is what it is. The doors, the wind. The skillet's me setting it down wrong. The bird is a bird, and if it's trouble, I'll be there first. She said nothing, as if memorizing that sentence. The wind carried sage from the creek, and for the first time since stepping through his door, something in her chest began to loosen. That afternoon, they finished the fence. Crooked, but sturdy. She stepped back, let out a small, surprised laugh. He didn't look at her, only at the fence, but both knew what the laughter was for. Evening brought beans and cornbread again. No one apologized for repeating the meal. Under lamplight, she folded a dish towel into 3 perfect parts. He watched her hands and thought about jars with her handwriting on their labels. Shirts patched with matching thread. Not a dream, just measuring the future and finding room for it. When darkness settled in full, they stepped onto the porch. He sat on the lower step, hands resting open on his knees. She sat above, her shoulder level with the brim of his hat. The space between them felt exactly right. "You're safe here," he said, "and wanted here." She looked into the dark until the first star appeared. Then the second. I never thought those 2 things could be true at the same time. They can. She drew a deep breath. Then, I'll learn the language of it. He nodded. The boards beneath them gave a soft pop as the night air cooled. Somewhere far off, a coyote called once, then was still. The lamp's glow stopped just shy of her locked door, as if it too respected the boundary. In this wide country that forgets people easily, there are plenty of tales full of gun smoke and pounding hooves, but there are also quiet Western romances like this one, where a bond grows from a morning coffee and a fence built side by side. Stories that don't need an audience to be true. He rose, took the cup from her hand, and tapped the door frame lightly. "Up early tomorrow." "I know." He kept the lamp low. She closed the door and turned the lock once, only once. In this country, safety is sometimes nothing more than a hinge that doesn't creak, a fence that doesn't lean, and 2 coffee cups cooling on the porch, where no one needs to explain why they stayed. Part 2, music and dance. That night, the sky unfurled like a black canvas scattered with silver dust. The stars glinting in a stillness so deep, you could almost hear the wind changing course along the hillside. The oil lamp inside had been turned low, leaving a warm amber glow pooling in one corner of the porch. Genevieve sat on the steps, knees drawn up, chin resting lightly atop them, both hands wrapped around a tin mug of tea gone cold. The light was just enough to catch the softness of her features, but in her eyes lingered a faraway look, as though she were seeing someplace half a world away. Lawson emerged from the barn carrying something long, wrapped in an old oilcloth. He set it on the porch table, unwrapped it, and revealed a fiddle worn bare of varnish, the neck polished smooth by years of playing. Without a word, he checked each string, turning the pegs with a motion born of habit. Genevieve tilted her head toward him. "You play." "Never showed off," he answered, eyes still on the strings. "Why not?" No one ever asked. She pressed her lips together, lowering her gaze to hide the flicker of a smile. The first stroke of the bow came slow, a little rough on the opening note, then smoothed out, flowing like water over rounded stones. The melody was an old Kentucky tune, carrying both longing and peace, like it belonged to dirt roads and sunsets you'd want to sit and watch forever. A breeze slipped through the trees, the rustle of leaves weaving into the music. Genevieve closed her eyes, letting the sound seep into a place she'd kept silent for years. When she opened them again, she found her fingers tapping the rim of her cup in time. "You don't seem like the kind to keep music in a barn," she murmured. "I keep it for the right moment." The tune shifted, lightening into a quicker rhythm, playful as wind, teasing the new leaves. She laughed a small, clear laugh, and Lawson paused mid-bow, looking up. It was the first time he'd seen her smile, without the weight of caution or memory pressing it down. He tucked the bow beneath his arm, extending his free hand toward her. "No streetlights, no crowd. This porch will do." She hesitated, as though there was a thin river between them that she could cross in one step. Setting her cup aside, she let her hand brush against his. When Lawson pulled her up, their heartbeats fell into the same rhythm as the lingering notes in the airs. They moved slowly, awkwardly at first, the porch boards uneven, space too narrow. But then the fiddle's memory seemed to guide them. Her small turns caught the lamplight one moment, and the dark sway of tree shadows the next. Lawson's gaze never left her, not measuring, not searching, but listening, as if she were telling a story he didn't want to end. And Genevieve, in that moment, thought neither of train stations, nor abandoned letters, nor the city that had swallowed her youth. She thought only of the hand holding hers firm enough to keep her steady, yet light enough to let her go if she wished. She didn't wish to go. The tune ended in a slow turn. Lawson set the bow aside, leaned the fiddle against the porch wall, the faint thud of wood on wood, sounding like a quiet sigh. The night air moved through the cottonwoods, bringing the scent of dry earth and wild grass. Genevieve stood there, her hand still carrying the warmth of his. Neither moved to sit. The lamp lit half her face, leaving the other half in shadow, where her eyes held something unspoken. "I thought, coming here, I'd be starting a new life," she said softly, as if afraid her words might break in the air. Lawson stayed silent, shoulders loose, waiting. "I thought it would hurt. Being left behind, that I'd feel humiliated, angry." She shook her head faintly. "But all I feel is relief." The confession made him lean slightly toward her, searching her eyes. He didn't answer, with "It's all right," or "I understand" too easy for something that needed quiet to settle in. After a moment, he asked, "Why relief?" "Because I know. I dodged a life worse than being abandoned." He gave a small nod, gaze drifting toward the dark beyond the porch. "Would you really want to belong to a man like Tom?" "No, I just want to belong somewhere." She hesitated, then looked at him, voice low but sure. "And I don't know if I can belong here." He met her eyes, steady even with the wind tossing grit through the air. "You're safe here, and you're wanted here." She blinked, not because the words were sudden, but because they'd been spoken as truth, not promise. Somewhere inside her, a locked door seemed to hear the turn of a key. "You don't know me," she said. "I know enough." Silence followed, but the space between them was gone. Leaves brushed together above them, whispering agreement. A night insect tapped against the curtain and fell to the floor, its sound tiny yet somehow clear in the quiet. Genevieve drew in a deep breath, wanting to keep the scent of this night, the wood, the ghost of coffee, and the faint possibility of a new life beginning here. "I'm not ready. I'll wait." The way he said it, steady as the ground beneath their feet, made her chest tighten. not with hurt, but with the knowledge that he was giving her both choice and reason to stay. He picked up the fiddle and carried it inside, returning with 2 small wooden chairs. Setting one near the porch step, he pulled the other close enough that their knees were just half a hand apart. She sat, hands clasped loosely in her lap, hair spilling over her shoulders, a few strands lifted by the breeze as if inviting the night to touch them. Crickets sang in the darkness. Far off, on the hillside, a lone coyote called not in threat, just as part of the night. For the first time, she didn't hear it as warning. Lawson leaned back, arms resting on the chair's sides. Nights here? They're not like anywhere else. Not like Chicago, she said, with a faint curve of her lips. Here, if you're quiet, you hear more. They stayed still, and just as he'd said, the sounds began to rise. Water murmuring in the creek, wind brushing the cottonwood trunks, a hen shifting in the coop. Each one had the shape of peace, and she realized she was sitting in the very middle of it. She let her shoulder rest lightly against his. Lawson didn't move away. In that quiet, something had changed. The guarded distance from the day she'd stepped off the wagon was gone, replaced by a shared breath. The cottonwoods whispered like soft cloth rubbing together. Genevieve closed her eyes and let the sound rock her. For the first time since leaving the city, she felt not alone. The moon lifted over the ridge, pouring silver across the yard. 2 people sat together on the porch, silent. But to any passerby, it would be plain they were no longer strangers, but something growing slow and sure, with no need to be rushed. Morning light slipped through the curtains, painting the room a pale gold. Genevieve woke to the sound of measured footsteps in the kitchen, no longer the sound of an intruder. It was the sound of morning itself. She washed her face at the porch basin, the cool water rinsing away an old layer of dust from within. Lawson was at the stove, back to her, pouring coffee. He tilted his head enough to know she'd come in, but said nothing at first. Sleep well? Yes, this time. I didn't dream at all. He poured 2 mugs, sliding one toward her. The heat seeped into her hands. They carried their coffee out to the same chairs as the night before. The yard was still wet with dew, the fence posts dark against the faint light. Birds perched along the rails, heads cocked like curious visitors. Genevieve watched them, then said slowly, "If I stayed." He glanced at her, waited. I'd plant sunflowers along the fence, so by fall, this place would be all gold. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. Then we'll plant them. The silence that followed was the kind shared by people already building something together. When the coffee was gone, Genevieve went to the cupboard without waiting to be told, pulling out cornmeal to make bread. The sound of the spoon stirring in the bowl mixed with Lawson's voice outside, murmuring to the horses as he tightened their saddles. No thank yous were exchanged, but every motion carried the quiet vow. I'm here, I'm doing my part, and I want to stay. By the time the bread was baked, its scent filled the porch. Lawson came in, pulling off his gloves. Smells good. First time I've cooked here. Hope it's not the last. She met his eyes through the steam, and for the first time, she no longer looked like a stranger in a temporary place. She looked like someone beginning to see her place in the picture. That evening, the sky was so clear, the far hills felt closer. Lawson cooked beans and salted pork over the outdoor fire, while Genevieve chopped wild onions from the garden. The sun slid low, gilding the fence, the barn roof, and her hair until each strand shone like spun thread. They ate at the small porch table, no tablecloth, just worn white enamel plates and their 2 tin cups. Better than yesterday, he said, cutting into her cornbread. She kept her eyes on the garden. Maybe because today, I know where I'll be eating. His gaze locked on her. She set her fork down, fingers lacing together. Lawson, I don't want to just be here out of gratitude. I want to be truly part of this place. He didn't speak right away, his fingers drumming lightly on the cup's rim. If that's what you want, then tomorrow. We plan for more than one season, not just one season, she said, her breath slow and steady. I want to stay longer, as long as you want me to, leaning forward into the lamplight. He spoke low and certain. I've wanted that since the moment you stepped off that wagon. The wind seemed to ease, cottonwood leaves whispering their agreement overhead. She reached across the table, and he took her hand large, warm, holding as though it wasn't something he intended to let go. They stayed like that, letting the quiet speak for them. The hens were silent now, the air laced with the smell of wood smoke and cooling earth. She smiled small, easy, without need for reason. Then, let's begin. He nodded once. Begin. The moon rose over the ridge, silver, spilling across the yard, the fence, and the two of them on the porch. No longer strangers under the same roof, but two people who had found where they meant to belong. Part 3. A trust bigger than themselves. July mornings rose pale and white now, no longer honey gold, like the start of the season. The wind carried the scent of scorched grass and dry earth down from the ridges. Lawson had led a wiry, quick-witted horse from the corral at first light. Not his strongest mount, but gentle enough not to spook a beginner, and clever enough to test anyone who tried to guide it. Genevieve came down the slope in a riding dress she'd altered the night before. The skirt flared just enough to sit comfortably in the saddle, her hair tied low and neat. Practical, without feeling bound, she stopped at the gate, her gaze a blend of caution and resolve. I've never ridden anything, except the carousel at the church fair. That's still better than nothing, Lawson replied. No smile, no teasing. He bent, lacing his hands to give her a step up. She placed her foot, let him lift her into the saddle. The motion was gentle, but once she was settled, he stepped back half a pace, his eyes as steady as if he'd just handed her the reins to a responsibility. Hold firm, but don't cling. A horse can feel your hands, and if it runs, then pull right. I'll be on the left. That last line struck harder than the sound of hooves on dry earth. Lawson walked beside the horse's flank, one hand on the spare lead rope, the other loose near her knee. When the animal shifted, humping its back in a half-hearted test, she leaned instinctively, pressing her knees into the saddle. Good, he said, short and low, but there was something in his tone, rough-edged approval, that made her proud. They circled the dry paddock. The sun grew stronger, sweat beating on her temples. Each lap, Lawson loosened his grip on the rope, letting her steer more herself. By the fourth lap, when the horse tried to veer right, she tightened the left rein and pressed with her knee, bringing it back on track. He gave her a rare flicker of a smile. You did that yourself, and I'm still in the saddle. She was breathing hard, but her eyes were bright. When the lesson ended, Lawson's hand lingered a beat longer than necessary as he helped her down. They walked the horse back to the corral in step, saying nothing, but with every stride, Genevieve felt something shifting, not just in her riding, but in the sense that he'd handed her a piece of this place to hold steady on her own. Evening poured down like warm molasses, the last light sliding across the new fence, catching on the red barn roof, settling on the scarred porch table, whose knife marks were as honest as an old man's smile lines. Lawson washed his hands at the pump, the water ringing against the tin basin, then dried them on the towel. Looped over the post, Genevieve fed wood into the outdoor stove. The smell of beans mingled with wood smoke, warm as a quilt pulled to your chest in late autumn. Dinner was simple beans, cornbread, a little thin-sliced salt pork on old enamel plates. A breeze rattled the curtain in the window, carrying the dry sweetness of cut hay from across the creek. They ate slowly, no long talk, just the scrape of spoons and the steady breath of two people who'd worked under a hard sun, when only red embers remained in the stove. Genevieve went inside. Lawson thought she was fetching water or clearing dishes, but she returned with an oilcloth-wrapped bundle. She set it on the table as if placing down a secret. This! She hesitated, testing whether the wind would carry her voice away. I want you to have, he unwrapped it, a deep blue work shirt, thick enough for ranch mornings. The collar and shoulders double-stitched. Small round wooden buttons sewn with matching thread. He ran his thumb along the inside of the collar, feeling the cool, tight weave. He looked up. You made this? Yes. She glanced down, seeing it again through her own hands. Found the fabric in the trunk, back in Chicago. I used to mend for dock workers. Just habit. I thought it might fit. Silence moved through the porch, but not the cold kind. Lawson shrugged off his suspenders, tried it on. The shoulders fit close, sleeves ending right at the wrist bone. As he fastened the second button, Genevieve gave a small, quiet laugh that lit her eyes. Fits. Like you measured me. Didn't measure, she said, but I knew. He didn't ask how. Out here, some things you just knew about each other without the asking. The lamplight softened the angles of his face. He sat again, hands resting on the table, fingertips still carrying the memory of thread under cloth. Thank you, he said. Few words. The kind that, from Lawson, meant more. The wind shifted, cottonwood leaves brushing each other in a whisper. Genevieve slid her chair closer, not much, just enough that her knee touched the shadow of his on the floorboards. She looked at the shirt, then the garden, the crooked fence, a plain witness to everything said here. Lawson, she said, slow and deliberate. I've thought a lot about belonging. I don't want to be someone passing through. Not here out of debt. I want to stay, to build. The words landed like a small bird choosing to rest in a hand. Lawson didn't answer right away. He tapped the table once with his wrist, eyes never leaving her. Stay, he repeated, tasting the word. And build. Yes, then. Tomorrow, we go into town for nails, seed, and good wire for the chicken coop. We'll mark off the west garden for planting. Next season we'll be busy. She gave a soft laugh. You always answer with work. Talk is easy to forget. Fences aren't. She spread her hand flat on the table, as if mapping something invisible. Over there, she pointed toward the pale patch of ground. I want sunflowers by fall. It'll be a wall of gold. Done. I'll run a pipe from the creek. Might trade old iron pipe from town for a few squash come harvest. She looked at him a long moment. The last daylight slipped from the new shirt, leaving its blue, deep as night water, in her eyes. Something moved slow, like snow touching a winter river, melting and blending in. I'm afraid, she admitted, barely above a whisper. Afraid one day I won't be enough. Afraid if someone asks, I'll feel like an outsider again. People can ask, Lawson said evenly. Warm. We'll answer with the garden, the fence, the coop, with mornings lit and lamps burning at night. No one can argue with a life being lived. She laughed, longer this time, like a note she wanted to keep. She fetched a coil of twine and a folding knife from the trunk, set them between them. Tomorrow, we mark the sunflower plot. Itai, you set the posts. All right, I drive them straighter than you anyway. You're better at that. She smirked. Inside, the fiddle leaned against the porch wall, its wood catching stray light like a banked ember. Genevieve pulled her shawl closer, but her eyes kept straying to the shirt he wore. A new shirt couldn't change a life, but it could say, a pair of hands is expecting you home. A pair of eyes knows the span of your shoulders by heart. Someone once told me, love needs vows, she said suddenly. I think love needs a fence set straight, a garden watered, and 2 cups side by side without asking permission. Lawson tipped his head, eyes bright under the brim, resting on the table. Sometimes it just needs what you've said. Her ears warmed, but she didn't look away. I want to stay, she said, the English clear on her tongue, firm yet gentle. I want to stay. Build together. The breeze stirred. The cottonwood branches shivered, as if the earth itself answered, Amen. Lawson's hand came to rest over hers, not gripping, just touching. Then we stay and build, he said, each word solid as good timber. Together, at the horizon, a thin spill of stars emerged. The creek below the hill murmured what it had for 100 years. Keep flowing, and the stones will round. On the porch, 2 people sat with a blue shirt, a coil of twine, a folding knife, and a decision placed like the first stone of a foundation. The noisy Wild West beyond the gunshots, the hoofbeats. The trains seemed far away. Here, a different kind of Western romance was writing itself. Fewer words, more doing, fewer promises, more staying. Sometimes, the best Wild West stories didn't need a grand ending. Just a hand resting on another hand, both looking toward the land that would bloom. Before turning in, Genevieve cleared the dishes, smoothed the small cloth on the table. Lawson banked the embers, the fire settling like a story that had found its last line. He opened the door, letting her step in first. The lock on the front room was still there, but tonight she didn't see it as a fortress. Safety was elsewhere, in his footsteps in the kitchen, in the wood smoke caught in the rafters, in the blue shirt hanging by the hearth, waiting to be worn to town at sunrise. We leave early, Lawson said, dimming the lamp. I know, she replied, a calm smile on her lips. Sunflowers need straight posts. He smiled, with his eyes a rare thing. And we need a long day. The night settled over the roof like an unspoken vow. In the late 19th century West, where people could lose each other in the wind, there were still porches where a person could sit and know they'd found the right place, where a shirt sewn by hand could change the course of a life, not because it was fine, but because someone had made it thinking. I see you and I'm here. Part 4. The decision to stay. By the time sunlight had just begun to spill over the barn roof, Genevieve was already in the chicken coop. The warm musk of straw and feathers mixed into a scent no one would call sweet. Yet to her, it was the smell of having a place to wake up to. And something worth doing that was hers. She scattered grain with a rhythm that had grown familiar. The hens bustled around her skirts, heads bobbing, pecking in a steady cluck, cluck that sounded like the hum of a quiet day. Sunlight slipped through gaps in the wooden slats, pooling in bright, dusty patches on her dress, even catching the small hand-stitched mend at its hem, making it shine like proof of care. Footsteps crunched across the yard steady, unhurried. Lawson opened the coop door, ducking inside with the dust of the road still on his shirt. In one hand, he held a soft-brimmed hat, dusted in pale brown, a sign he'd met someone in town. Genevieve glanced up, asking simply. Something happened. He stopped a step away, careful not to startle the hens. Someone stopped by, said next week. Land surveyors from Helena will be coming through. They're marking boundaries before the territory files for statehood. She froze mid-motion, the last grain falling to the straw, with a sound so small they both heard it. Does your land fall in that area? Lawson gave a short nod. Part of the west section. It's never been officially measured since my father's day. Her lips pressed tight, a flicker of concern in her eyes. If there's a dispute, he met her gaze, voice steady and certain. You're not leaving here. We built this place together. The words landed in the cramped air of the coop, like a fence post driven straight into the ground. The hens kept pecking. The faint thump of a wing filled the silence between them. She looked at him, and her eyes trembled, not with fear, but with something stronger. The feeling of being claimed in the truest sense. Not a guest, not charity, but part of this place. She breathed deep, drawing in the scents of straw, road dust, and sun-warmed cotton from his blue shirt. You said, together, I didn't say the rest out loud. Lawson admitted with a small nod. But I've thought it for a long time. The step of space between them no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like a strip of land they'd just measured. Both of them, knowing the line of twine stretched there belonged to them and to no one else. They stepped out into the brightening yard, the sun higher and hotter now, but neither of them minded. Lawson walked ahead, his pace easy enough for her to match. In his hand, a coil of twine swung with each step, the loose end trailing like a lazy snake. At the west plot, the same place they'd measured weeks ago, for the sunflowers, he stopped. Weeds hugged the base of the posts. The air was thick with the smell of dry dirt and the faint resin of new-cut wood. When they come, we'll show them every line, Lawson said, his voice deep as wood knocking wood. Every post, she murmured, brushing the worn top of one with her fingers. We set together. He nodded. And if we have to, we'll set them again, together. She stood straight, the wind teasing her skirt so it brushed his leg. I don't think of myself as a guest here anymore. Lawson? His nod was small, but carried more weight than any deed of title. Good. Guests can leave them. Family stays. They walked the boundary line, pausing at each post as if revisiting the day they'd sunk it. She ran her fingertips along the twine as they passed. At the final post, where the land dipped toward the rock flats, Lawson turned. The sun behind him lit her face, and her eyes seemed to hold the whole of the property in them. Do you ever think? It all started with me being left in front of an empty house. I do, Lawson said, and I think neither of us intends to end it there. Her smile carried both strength and release. The wind lifted it, carried it beyond the fence, over the hills, as if telling the land itself that these two had decided to stay. By late afternoon, the light mellowed to honey. Lawson came from the barn with a fresh post. Its tip sharpened, the wood smoothed. A heavy hammer hung from his other hand. He carried them to the far end of the plot where they'd stood that morning. Genevieve followed with a small coil of twine. She didn't ask what he meant to do. The answer was in her eyes. Curiosity mingled with a quiet, eager anticipation. He set the post into a shallow hole, its tip fitting snug. Laying down the hammer, he looked at her. This is the last section without a mark. We'll set it so no one forgets who it belongs to. He steadied the post, then held out the hammer. She hesitated, glancing at the calloused lines of his hand before taking it. I've never set a post before. Now, you will. The first strike rang solid, startling a pair of sparrows into flight. Lawson stayed close hands loose at his sides, ready if she missed. The second strike, then the third. Each blow sank the post deeper, the uncertainty on her face replaced by resolve. When the post was hip-high, Lawson laid his hand over hers on the hammer. Last one. Together, the hammer fell. The sound carried into the earth, up through their boots. The post stood straight, stubborn as a vow. Genevieve touched its top. Lawson's palm joined hers across the rough grain. No words, but the look they shared was its own binding contract. The breeze caught the loose end of the twine, lifting it. She tied it off with a neat knot. No one's cutting this line. No one, Lawson said, low and certain, so long as we keep it. They stayed a while, fixing the image into memory light, wind, the feel of solid wood beneath their hands. That night, a softer chill crept in. The porch lamp swayed gently, spilling gold onto the planks in wavering patterns. Lawson sat on the steps, back against a post, a steaming tin cup in his hand. Genevieve sat in a wooden chair beside him, shawl wrapped close, sometimes smoothing its edge over her arms. Crickets sang far off. The horses shifted in their stalls, and the cottonwood sighed overhead. These were the sounds you only learned to hear after you'd been somewhere long enough to belong. Setting his cup down, Lawson said, "Today, when we set that post, I thought about the day you stood outside this place, alone." She smiled faintly toward the dark. "So did I. And I thought, if you hadn't said, 'You will not be sleeping out here,' I wouldn't be here now." He nodded, the lamplight catching the strong planes of his face. "Today, I'd say it again. Only this time, instead of you, I'd say we. We built this place together." Her eyes caught the lamp's glow. "This time, you're not just trying to reassure me." "No." He shook his head. "I'm stating a fact. This isn't my house with you in it. It's our house." She was quiet for a beat, then reached over, resting her hand on his. It was rough, faintly scented with wood and iron, and to her, it smelled like a place that couldn't be taken away. "Then, Lawson, I'll stay, not because I have nowhere else, but because I want nowhere else." He didn't answer. With words, only tightened his hold on her hand. Outside, the new post stood tall, the twine pulled taut, binding them to the land and to each other. The next morning, the sun was barely cresting the hill when hoofbeats came from the trail. Genevieve swept the porch with a willow broom, its bristles whispering over the boards. Lawson emerged from the barn, hay still clinging to his shoulders. A man in a thick coat and low-brimmed hat rode up on a chestnut gelding, dismounted, and tied his reins to the gate. From an inner pocket, he produced a bundle of papers bound with twine. "I'm from the land office in Helena, ordered to resurvey before statehood. Boundaries have to be clear." Lawson stepped down from the porch, standing straight, neither dodging nor challenging the man's look. "You surveying all parcels in the area?" "Yes." "And without proper papers, there can be disputes?" Genevieve's grip on the broom handle tightened. Her heartbeat picked up, but she didn't step back. Lawson glanced at her briefly, then faced the man, voice even, and sure, "We'll walk you through it. This land's been built, cared for, and defended together." The man's brows lifted slightly at the word, but he nodded. "Then let's start at the first post." They led him out. Genevieve, carrying the same coil of twine that still held the warmth from last night's work. At the east fence line, Lawson stopped, set his hand on a post, and motioned for her to place hers beside it before the surveyor looked. "You see," Lawson said, "every post here has both our hands on it, not just mine." The surveyor was quiet a moment, then nodded. "Then, the record will carry both your names." Something in Genevieve's chest tightened, then opened, like drawing the first full breath in years. She looked at Lawson, and in his slight nod, she read the words he didn't need to speak. "Now, this is our home, in every way." Far down the line, the morning sun caught on the taut run of twine, making it glow like a thread of gold. And along that golden line, two shadows walked side by side, steady as the ground beneath them. Part 5. A lifetime together. That summer, the sky was so clear, not a single cloud dared drift across it. The old cottonwood by the creek was heavy with leaves, its broad crown stirring in the breeze, throwing a deep circle of shade on the grass below. Tiny white blossoms fell like summer snow, catching in hair and on shoulders. Genevieve wore a simple cream dress, each seam stitched in long, quiet nights under lamplight, no veil, no string of pearls, just a wreath of wildflowers in her hair, with a few cottonwood blossoms tucked among them. Lawson wore an old white shirt, dark work trousers, boots worn smooth with years, and his everyday hat today resting quietly on a branch nearby. The wedding was small, a handful of people who mattered. The old preacher from town, the neighboring ranch couple, and 2 friends who had helped them set their fence line. There were no costly gifts, only baskets of bread, a few bottles of apple cider, and blessings spoken straight from the heart. The preacher's voice was warm and steady, like water over stone. When he asked Lawson, "Do you promise to stand by her in harvest and in loss, in health and in sickness, in days of joy and in nights of hardship?" Lawson met Genevieve's eyes, clear and unwavering. "I already do." When it was Genevieve's turn, the preacher asked, "Do you promise to stand by him when the wind is fair and when the storms rise, when the land is rich and when it turns to dust?" She smiled, a smile both light and deep. "No, I got more. I promise to keep building with him." The preacher nodded, his weathered face softening with approval. There was no burst of applause, only the wind in the cottonwood leaves, the creek's quiet murmur, and the way their eyes held each other, making the vows more real and enduring than any ceremony could. When it ended, Lawson didn't kiss her in front of everyone. He simply pressed his forehead to hers, his hand resting at her back, as if to say, "We are here, and we will remain." The meal after was under the cottonwood shade cornbread, cider, wildflowers on the table, laughter blending with birdsong. And in the middle of it all, Genevieve realized their home wasn't just the cabin or the land. It was the people who had witnessed and blessed this day. 15 years passed since that morning under the cottonwood. This autumn, the orchard behind the house glowed gold. Apple, pear, and plum trees stood in straight lines, their gnarled trunks heavy with fruit. The air was thick with the sweet scent of ripeness, mingling with the damp earth after last night's rain. Genevieve's hair was longer now, silver, threaded through dark brown. She walked slowly between the rows, a basket of apples swinging from her arm. Sunlight slanted through the leaves, painting her face in warm patches, showing the lines at the corners of her eyes, marks of wind, sun, and more smiles than she could count. At the far end of the orchard, Lawson balanced on a wooden ladder, filling a crate with fruit. His shoulders had grown broader, his back bent a little with the years, but every movement was as steady as the day she'd met him. "We'll need another basket," she called. He glanced down, eyes crinkling. "Thought I'd picked it all." She pointed to a high branch. "No, I got more." The words made him pause, as if hearing an echo from 15 years ago. His smile was small, deep, the kind that starts in the eyes. They picked the last of the fruit together, each time he handed her an apple. Their fingers brushed familiar touches, needing no apology. It felt as natural as breathing, as if they'd been made to repeat these small gestures for a lifetime. When the baskets were full, they sat on the long bench beneath the oldest apple tree. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the rustle of leaves above, the hum of bees, the quiet heat of him beside her. She wanted to close her eyes and keep it forever. "You know," Lawson murmured, "everything here. The orchard, the cabin, the fence started the day I told you. You will not be sleeping out here." Genevieve opened her eyes, smiling. "And it won't end until neither of us is here." The breeze carried the scent of fruit and seasons past. They both knew in that moment that a lifetime together wasn't one grand promise. It was thousands of small acts, repeated until they became who they were. Years later, a cool morning fog blanketed the valley. The cottonwood still stood by the creek, more gnarled now, its roots rising higher, but its shade still wide and sheltering. Beneath it sat an old wooden chair facing the sunrise. Genevieve's hair was silver white as she stepped from the porch. In her hands, the wool shawl Lawson had given her many winters ago. She laid it on the chair before sitting, folding her hands in her lap. The orchard was still gold each autumn, the fence still upright, the porch still creaked underfoot. But beside her, there was no sound of boots on the boards, no calloused hand resting on hers. Lawson had been gone a few years now. She didn't cry. Instead, she looked toward the first post they'd ever set together. The old twine had long since been replaced, but it still tied the posts as tight as that day. "You see, Lawson, I'm still here," she whispered. "No, I got more. I've had all the seasons after you." The morning wind brought the smell of wet earth, cottonwood leaves, and the faint sweetness of apples. She closed her eyes, breathing it in as if he had just placed a hand on her shoulder. When she opened them, the first sunlight had spilled over the hill, touching the chair, the fence post, and her hands. She smiled, resting her palm on the ground, the land they had built and kept together, and which she now kept for them both. Far above, a bird crossed the sky, its shadow sweeping over the orchard and fence before vanishing toward the mountains. She watched until it was gone, the air left with only the wind and the sound of leaves. Under the cottonwood, she knew, a lifetime together didn't end when one was gone. It lived on in the soil, in the wind, and in the heart that stayed. That afternoon, sunlight slanted gold over the valley. Genevieve stood on the porch, fingers brushing the worn wood of the door Lawson had closed each night. Her gaze went to the orchard, where her grandchildren ran between the rows, their laughter rolling out across the land like a promise that life would keep going. As full as those first seasons, she stepped down onto the yard, the old boots making their familiar thud on the boards. At the cottonwood, she stopped, the light falling in shifting patterns across her face. She knelt, laying her hand on the soil. Her voice was low, almost a prayer. "We kept it all, Lawson, and I'm still here." The wind rose, spinning a few leaves down to her feet. One landed in her palm. She smiled, lifted it, and walked back toward the porch, carrying it like a message from him, a reminder that love doesn't live only in memory. Behind her, the fence, the orchard, and the little house stood quiet and strong. Time could change many things, but they remained proof of a lifetime together, not built by grand vows, but by the small, daily acts repeated over the years. And in the hush of that place, the storyteller's voice would drift out, steady and low. "Tell us, what did this story stir in you? Leave your thoughts below and rate it from 0 to 10. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a ride. A home isn't where you hide, it's where you stay. And sometimes, staying is the most complete way to love. If you've ever chosen silence over revenge, write in the comments. I understand Lawson, the cowboy found. 2. Apache girls, bound in the desert. What one whispered made him freeze. Before we ride into this story, take a moment to drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from, what town or city you're calling home tonight. And when the end, this story, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Now lean back, get comfortable, and enjoy the story. She was tied to a dying tree when I found her, skin split from sunburn, lips dry as sand, wrists cut raw from rope. The other girl beside her looked even worse, barely 12, barely breathing. I gave the older one water, slow and steady, like you do for a wild thing that might bite. She drank without looking at me, then leaned in. Her lips barely moved. "Don't trust her," she whispered. And just like that, she passed out cold. I stood there, canteen in one hand, knife in the other, heart pounding like thunder behind my ribs, because I thought she meant the younger girl. But she didn't. She meant someone else, someone watching, someone already too close. Cooper Langley wasn't a man most folks remembered, and he preferred it that way. He rode alone, always had. Long trail behind him, longer silence ahead. Folks out west said the desert played tricks, made ghosts out of heat and men alike. But what Cooper saw that morning beneath the dead mesquite wasn't a trick. It was two girls, bound, burned, barely alive. The older one had dried blood in her hair and something steel set in her jaw. A girl who'd seen too much, said too little. The younger, just bones and fever, skin scorched, face slack, might have looked like sisters. Weren't, not exactly. But that truth would come later. Cooper dismounted slow, like he was approaching a sleeping snake. Canteen in one hand, knife in the other. She didn't flinch when he cut the ropes, just locked eyes with him, steady, as if daring him to be a man worth trusting. Then came the whisper, "Don't trust her." He thought she meant the child, but the way her gaze drifted past him, up toward the ridge, he knew better. The wind shifted, his horse snorted, and that's when he saw the riders. Two of them, coming fast. No time for names, no time for stories. Just enough time to throw the girl on the saddle and run. They rode hard through the gulch, bullets biting at the dust behind them. Cooper didn't know what devil he'd stepped between. All he knew was this wasn't chance. Wasn't mercy either. By nightfall, he'd found a hidden cut in the canyon wall where the firelight wouldn't show. He watched the girls from the shadows. The older one curled tight, like a bow never unstrung. The younger lay near his saddle, her tiny hand still clutching the locket at her throat. Old silver, worn, marked. That's when he asked, voice barely more than breath, "You got names?" The older girl stared at the flames. "Her name's Puma, and you?" A long pause. Then finally, "Naella, I'm Cooper Langley." "I know," she said. That made him stop. The desert didn't give answers, only more questions, and one of them was riding just behind his saddle, wrapped in a coat too big, too late. Would she dare to stay? Would he? They didn't know it yet, but this was the night. The wind began to change, and in the silence between crackling brush and flickering flame, the weight of three broken paths began to press into one trail, one path forward, and no way back. Part 1. Don't trust her. The desert didn't shout when it wanted to kill you. It whispered, soft, through the rocks, low, in the bones. And that morning, Cooper Langley heard it, not with his ears, but with that quiet place inside. A man who's lived through too many goodbyes. He was riding the old trail east of Dry Needle Ridge, looking for firewood, or maybe just a reason to keep moving. The heat was already rising, like smoke off the canyon walls, and his horse's hooves kicked up more dust than sense. Then he saw them. At first, they looked like shadows slumped beneath a dead mesquite. But shadows don't bleed, and they sure don't tremble. He slid from his saddle slow, eyes narrowing. Two girls, Apache, young, tied hand and foot with worn rope, ankles rubbed raw. One lay on her side, unmoving. The other sat upright, head tilted, like it barely had the strength to hold. Blood had dried in her hair, rust-colored, like a blade, forgotten too long in the rain. She looked at him, not with fear, not even hope, just that hollow kind of knowing, the kind that only comes from surviving the worst of men. Cooper unstrapped his canteen. "Drink slow," he said, kneeling, holding it to her lips. She did. 3 swallows, maybe 4. Then her hand twitched, and she leaned in, her voice barely a breath. "Don't trust her," she whispered. He froze, not because of what she said, but how she said it. Not a plea, not a warning, just a truth she'd carried too long. Then her head dropped. Cooper turned to the younger one. Couldn't have been more than 12. Her lips were cracked, eyes fluttered open like she'd forgotten how. He cut the rope's ankles first, then wrists. The older one flinched when the last knot slipped free, but didn't stop him. The younger whimpered soft as he lifted her into his arms. She smelled of dust and fear. Then came the sound that split the moment wide open, a sharp snort from his horse. Quick, alarmed, Cooper's hand went straight to his holster. He turned, scanned the ridge. 2 riders, silhouetted hard against the sun, coming fast. His gut turned to ice. This wasn't no accident, he muttered. He spun, hoisted the girl onto the saddle. The older one tried to climb up, stumbled, but grit her teeth and did it anyway. Cooper mounted behind them and kicked the horse hard. They tore down the gulch. Just as the first bullet whispered past his ear, they didn't stop riding until the sun sank behind the rocks and the air turned sharp with night. Later, they made camp in a dry cut between the boulders. No fire, too risky, just cold jerky and a canteen passed hand to hand. The girls sat huddled together, silent shadows under a darkening sky. Cooper sat apart, back to stone, eyes on the dark. But more than watching, he listened for footsteps, a breath out of place, anything that might belong to the man who tied them up and left them to die. He didn't know that man yet, but the girl's whisper echoed in him like a church bell, struck in the ribs. Don't trust her. Who? The younger one. Someone still out there. Or maybe herself. When the moon rose and the silence had stretched long enough to settle, Cooper finally spoke. You got names. The older girl didn't answer right away. Then, eyes still sweeping the dark, her name's Puma. And yours? She hesitated. Nyella. Cooper nodded. I'm Cooper Langley. I know, she said. That made him still. You do. She said nothing more, just kept watching the dark, as if it might shift and show her something she already feared. Later, when both girls were curled asleep beside the rocks, Cooper sat beside the low flicker of embers. He thought about her words. Don't trust her. Words like that don't just spill out. They come from scars, deep ones. Somewhere out there, someone still wanted those girls. Someone who tied them like cattle and left them for the vultures. Someone who might be hunting still. He didn't know what trail he'd stepped into, but the look in that girl's eyes told him clear. It wasn't over, not by a damn mile. In the last flickers of ember light, Nyella shifted in her sleep, murmured one word in Apache. Cooper's breath caught. Not a name. A title. Father. Part 2. The fire and the name. They didn't light a fire until the 3rd night. Too many miles behind them, too many false trails, too much silence stretched thin between each hoofbeat. Cooper led them through dry creek beds and thorn-choked gullies, narrow washes where the wind could slip in behind you and not even whisper its name. He checked behind them often, listened more than he spoke. They hadn't seen a rider since the first shot rang out, but Cooper didn't trust that kind of quiet. That evening, the sun dipped out early, dragging a sliver of moon behind it, pale and thin, like a cut across the sky. The canyon walls breathed cold, a kind that got inside your teeth and made your bones hum. The fire they made was small, just a flicker tucked into the hollow of 2 stones, barely enough to warm a tin cup. But still, it felt sacred. Puma. The younger girl curled close to the flames. She said nothing, didn't need to, wrapped in Cooper's coat. She clutched the silver locket at her throat and ran her thumb over it like she was trying to erase a memory etched in metal. Nyella sat behind her, one knee raised, arms wrapped tight around it, her eyes fixed on the dark like it owed her something. Cooper kept to himself, sharpened his knife, checked his rifle. Didn't ask, not yet. But the air had changed. Something had shifted. It was Nyella who finally broke the silence. "Back there," she said, voice low, steady as river stone. When I said, "Don't trust her," Cooper didn't lift his gaze, just waited. I wasn't talking about my sister. That made him pause. "Then who?" Nyella's eyes didn't blink, didn't leave the dark. "The man who tied us up," she said. "He's not just some outlaw. He's white. But he speaks Apache better than most elders. Wears our clothes. Took our names. He beat. Said we were his daughters now." Cooper's jaw tightened. "And he's the one who left you there." Nyella shook her head. "No, he sold us. To men heading east. Said we'd be useful." Her voice broke at the edges, but she didn't let it fall. "We ran, slipped off during a dust storm, got as far as the rocks." She looked at him now. "That's where you found us." The fire popped softly, casting long, flickering shadows. Puma had fallen asleep, her breathing slow. Nyella stared at the locket like it might start talking. "He called himself Father Blackbird," she said. "But I don't think that's his name." Cooper finally spoke. "You know his real name." She nodded. "Elijah Durant." The name dropped between them like a rattlesnake curling in the dirt. "I've heard it," Cooper muttered. "Durant, mission raised. Used to trade along the river routes. Then vanished." "He didn't vanish," Nyella said softly. "He just stopped pretending to be a man." They didn't speak for a long while after that. The canyon stretched wide around them, breathing again, coyotes calling from somewhere unseen, and the wind whispering secrets between rock and flame. Cooper took first watch. Nyella curled beside her sister. But she didn't sleep. Not really. He saw her lips moving. Not in prayer. Not this time. She whispered a name, over and over. "Puma, Puma, Puma." Like saying it enough times might protect her, might make the world back away. Near midnight, Cooper asked what had been sitting in his chest since day one. "How do you know me?" Nyella looked up. Her eyes weren't tired. They were sharp, alive in a way most grown men had forgotten how to be. "I remember your name," she said. "From before, when I was little." She sat up straighter. "You helped my uncle, years ago, near Yuma Crossing. They said you were a man who kept his word." Cooper swallowed slow. Yuma. That word cut deeper than she knew. He turned away from the fire. "Not everyone agrees with that," he said under his breath. Just before dawn, a shadow moved across the stars. His horse snorted low, nervous. Cooper rose in one fluid motion, rifle in hand. But it wasn't Durant. Not yet. Just a deer on the far slope. It looked at them for a long moment, then vanished into the brush. Still, the air didn't settle, because now Elijah Durant had a name, and the girls, they had one more truth on their side. Nyella names him Elijah Durant. The villain is no longer faceless. He has breath. He has history. He has vengeance. Just before the fire died, Nyella whispered toward the flame, voice barely more than smoke, "He won't stop. Not until one of us is dead." Part 3. Vulture's Crossing. They reached Vulture's Crossing just as the sun broke red over the rocks, if you could call it a town. 3 buildings leaning against each other like old drunks after a long, bitter night. A cracked sign above the trading post read, "Goods and lead." Mostly lead. Cooper reined in at the hitching post, scanned the windows. 2 horses were tied out front. Neither were his. That made his grip on the reins go stiff. Behind him, Puma slept against Nyella's back, still wrapped in his coat. The girl's head lolled gently with each sway. Nyella's voice broke the silence. "You sure about this place?" "No," Cooper said, "but it's better than dying out in the open." Inside, the store was too quiet. The kind of quiet that listens. The kind that waits. Shelves half-stocked. Whiskey on the counter. Something bubbling in a stew pot out back, too savory for a place this dead. Then the sound, boots on old wood, slow and certain. "Well, I'll be damned." a voice smooth as rusted iron. "If it ain't Cooper Langley, Ghost of the West." Cooper turned, slow. Clyde Bishop stepped from the shadows, tall, sharp-eyed, too clean for a man who claimed he'd retired, still riding alone. Clyde asked, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Cooper didn't answer, just nodded for the girls to come inside. Nyella hesitated. Something in Clyde's smile made her jaw tighten. It was all teeth and no warmth. By nightfall, they'd eaten. The girls lay resting in the back room on makeshift cots, saddle blankets, and borrowed breath. Clyde poured himself a whiskey, rolling it between his fingers like it might give him answers. "You look like a man riding with a price on his conscience," he said. Cooper sat near the hearth, rifle across his knees. "I found them tied up in the desert." "That so? I think someone's coming for them." Clyde's eyes narrowed. "I saw a rider 2 days back. White fella, tribal cloth. Called himself Father Blackbird." Cooper stiffened. "Did he ask about girls?" "No," Clyde said. "He asked about ghosts. Said something was taken from him. Said it was his to reclaim. I didn't like how he said it." Cooper's voice dropped. "That's him." Then Nyella stepped from the shadows of the back room. She looked older in the firelight. "Not in years, but in weight. I know who he is," she said. "Elijah Durant used to live near the mission where I was born. Took 4 girls once. Said it was for marriage. What happened to them? One came back," she said. Quiet. She hung herself. Silence settled like ash. "I saw him kill a priest," Nyella added. "That's why he wanted me quiet. I saw too much. Maybe I always did." Cooper rose and walked to the door. Outside, the stars were sharpening in a sky turning black. Nyella joined him. "You trust him?" she asked, nodding toward Clyde. "No." "Then why are we here?" "Because trust is a luxury." His voice was low. "But shelter? Shelter is survival." She didn't argue, just looked up at the stars and whispered, "I hope he comes." Dawn came like a blade across the rock. "A lookout, young," Jumpy shouted from the porch. "Rider." Cooper was already moving, rifle in hand. Dust curled up the far slope. One man walking his horse slow, wrapped in tribal cloth. But the eyes, cold, flat, dead as riverstone. "Elijah Durant," Cooper whispered. Durant raised a hand in mock peace. "I came for what's mine." Clyde joined him at the door. "You want to talk to him?" "No," Cooper said. "I want him gone." "You think he'll leave?" "No," Durant called again. "I bought them fair. Paid with blood, if not coin." "They're not yours," Cooper answered. "Not anymore." Durant laughed. "You think saving them makes you clean, makes you right." "I don't care about righteous," Cooper said. "I care about right." Then, a scream. "Nilla." Puma's voice from the back. Cooper spun. Too slow. Durant moved like lightning. And from behind the store, 2 more men stepped from the dust. Ambush. The first shot cracked wood near Cooper's head. He dove back inside. Behind, Clyde fired through the front window. Dropped one. Nyella grabbed Puma, pulled her behind a crate. "This is a damn setup," Clyde snarled. Cooper's eyes darted cover. Exits, angles. His rifle was half loaded. Not enough. His revolver, full. Better. "Nyella, stay down." "I'm not hiding," she shouted back. She had a knife now drawn from her boot. Then she said it. "There's something I haven't told you." "Not the time." Cooper snapped. "It is," she shot back. "If I die today, you need to know." He turned. Her face was pale, trembling, but her eyes were iron. "Durant's not just chasing us," she said. "He's chasing what he lost." She touched the locket around Puma's neck. That belonged to his daughter. Cooper froze. "What?" Nyella's voice dropped to a whisper. "He had a child with an Apache woman. She died giving birth. The tribe refused to let him raise her. Gave the baby to a family in my village." She lowered her gaze. Puma's not my blood sister. She's his daughter. Even Clyde went still. You knew. Naella nodded. He came for her when she was 6. The village said no. That night, the village burned. Cooper felt something twist inside his chest. He killed them. Naella nodded once. He's not after me. A pause. He's after her. Then, a gunshot tore through the back wall. Missed them by inches. Too late for talking. Clyde yelled. Smoke curled under the door. They're trying to burn us out. As fire crept beneath the floorboards and bullets tore through timber, Cooper buckled his revolver tight and looked Naella in the eye. You said he's chasing what he lost. She nodded. Then we finish it here. Durant is no longer just a captor. He's a father, obsessed with reclaiming blood through fire and force. The cabin becomes more than shelter. It becomes a trap, but also a stand. Part 4. The ridge, the smoke, found their lungs before it reached their eyes. Thick, sour, coating the back of the throat like regret. Cooper kicked out the back window, just as the front door groaned under pressure. No time to wait. No time to weigh the odds. He shoved Puma through first, then Naella, and followed last, landing hard in the dry arroyo behind the trading post, rifle strapped, revolver drawn. They didn't run fast, didn't need to. They ran up, toward the ridge. Behind them, Clyde held the line just long enough to fire 2 more shots. It bought them seconds, but seconds are currency in a place like this. Then came the crack. A bullet found his thigh. He dropped hard, blood blooming through denim. Go, he shouted. Don't wait for me. But Cooper turned, grabbed him under the arm, hauled him uphill, like a man who'd carried worse than wounded friends. Bullets chased their heels. Durant's voice echoed after them like poison wind. You're not saving her, Langley. You're just delaying it. They made it to the ridge. Jagged stone. No cover, but boulders. No options but stand or fall. Cooper dropped Clyde behind a rock and pressed a cloth against the wound. You hold pressure. You shoot anything that ain't me. Clyde coughed and gave a crooked grin. Wasn't planning to let him braid my hair. Behind them, Puma lay curled in Naella's arms. Palo, barely conscious. Naella trembled, but stood. What now? She asked. Voice thin as wind. Cooper met her eyes. Steel to steel. We finish this? He handed her a revolver. Only if they cross the line. And don't waste it. 10 minutes passed. Longer than you think. Then the wind shifted. Colder now. Sharper. And Durant came. Alone. Walking slow over the crest. Like a sermon with legs. Gun in hand. He didn't shoot. Not yet. Just let his words come first. Let's not waste lives, he called. Just give me the girl. Cooper stepped out from behind the stone. Wind in his coat. Dust in his teeth. You had a daughter once, he said. What would she think of the man you became? Durant's mouth twisted. She's dead because of people like you. They stole her from me. No, Cooper said softly. They saved her. Durant's jaw clenched. He raised the gun. Cooper fired first. The bullet struck Durant in the chest, knocked him to one knee, but he didn't fall. Blood bloomed, dark and slow. You think this ends it? He gasped. She's mine. He lifted the gun again, but the second shot didn't come from Cooper. It came from behind, from Naella. Her bullet hit him clean in the head. Durant dropped. No last words, no curse, just dust and silence. Only the wind now, and breath. Naella lowered the revolver. Her hand shook. She was never his, she said, voice steady now. No one owns a child. Cooper nodded. Behind them, Puma stirred. Eyes fluttered open, heavy with pain. It hurts, she whispered. I know, Cooper said, but you're safe now. She clutched his sleeve with fingers too small for the weight she'd carried. You're not gonna let him take me. Are you? Cooper swallowed. No, he said, not ever. She nodded, eyes slipping shut. Then I'll be brave. That near broke him. They buried Durant at the foot of the bluff. No prayers, no words. Some men don't get eulogies, only consequences. Clyde leaned against a rock, pale and bleeding, but alive. Next time, he